Chapter 1849. Recently, Gemini had been sent to the Horde by Duque. Duque subconsciously believed that the rest of the Twilight Hammer was already in Zotha's territory. If they were to enter a real cult with an evil god as a backdrop, Gemini would be defeated in no time. Duke didn't want Gemini to be secretly brainwashed or implanted with something unclean in her mind, only to end up harming himself. Therefore, Duque believed that this wasn't something Gemini should be involved in. Instead, the Horde was more suitable for Gemini. Gemini was indeed very successful. However, Brainless Roar didn't kill Variana, Serenaron, or Sinestra before taking over the Twilight Fortress. This news made Duque feel as disgusted as swallowing a fly. If Sinestra was there, even if the Horde could take over the Twilight Fortress, they would have to bleed to the last drop and use up all their strength. Unfortunately, Oni's mother wasn't there, which made Brainless Roar famous. That's right, Brainless Roar killed hundreds of thousands of Horde people and forced the other 4 races to leave. However, because he took over the Twilight Fortress and cut off the 2 heads of the traitor Gujar, he was still a great hero among the young orcs. So it's not time yet. Although Duque had messed with the goddess of fate countless times and was about to complete the great achievement of taming fate, fate would occasionally throw a tantrum at Duque, which made Duque feel like he couldn't completely understand it. Duque kept causing trouble, and fate's hand kept trying to fix the flow of fate. It felt like if he didn't intervene when the other party was about to die or when there was a big change in fate, it would be difficult to ruin the path of fate. Just like how Duque tried to kill Thrall when he was still a baby, but he didn't succeed. Master, do you want us to take advantage of the chaos in the Horde to control that Grim Totem and have her assassinate Thrall? Queen Sailora suggested with a charming smile. The air suddenly froze. A terrifying pressure, as if the entire world was pressing down on them, instantly froze Gemini's body. This wasn't a simple soul suppression, nor was it the purest double purgatory of ice and fire elements. Instead, it was the feeling that every magic circuit in his body was completely controlled by Duque, and every organ in his body was under his control. Sololas found that there was a strange change in her vision. The vision of her left and right eyes was not connected. She immediately understood that her eyeballs were being forced to look with her left eye and to look with her right eye. She noticed that her sister, Auras, was also in the same state. Duque was using such a terrifying and strange method to tell her that the Gemini twins were only his slaves. My puppet. Do whatever I tell you to do, but don't touch anything that you shouldn't do. We were wrong. Master, please spare my life. In the mouth that was still allowed to control itself, Gemini's lips spat out the same weak words. When she regained control of her body, Gemini was completely drenched, as if she had been fished out of the water. After telling Gemini to get out of here, Duque fell into deep thought. At this time, Duque received a soul message from his mount. Duque sent a telepathic message over. Onyxia, I have something for you to do. At this time, Alexstrasza was preparing to hold a dragon meeting in the Wormris Temple. Although Duque, the mortals, and the guardian Hygel formed by the god of the wilderness had joined forces to thwart the conspiracy of Lager and Al-Akir, the threat of the Twilight Hammer was still not eliminated. Therefore, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza decided to convene the Dragon Kings and the Backbone to hold a meeting to deal with the Twilight Hammer. Before the meeting, Alexstrasza and Krasis communicated in the Ruby Temple at the bottom of the Wormris Temple, but the meeting ended on bad terms. The Queen said, the mortals have done too much to protect this world. After all, this cataclysm was caused by the traitor Nesario and Zoth. We, the Wormris Temple, cannot remain silent. I want to gather all the dragons and attack the believers of the Twilight Hammer on a global scale. Krasis was stunned. All the dragons, including the black dragons and blue dragons? Of course, they are also an important part of the Wormris Temple. I think the blue dragons have not recovered from the loss of Malygos, so we should not send them out so hastily. Moreover, among the black dragons, Onyxia is the only black dragon who is willing to obey the orders of the Wormris Temple. We should get rid of them. Could it be that the bronze dragons and green dragons also have their own missions? In the end, just like the previous times, only the Red Dragon Legion will charge and break through the enemy lines? Cleostras, you are too selfless. Nisario is the common enemy of the 5-color dragons. I have decided to hold a meeting of the dragons as soon as possible. I will squeeze enough combat power from the various dragon kings. If this is the case, Your Majesty, please allow me to refuse to participate in the meeting. I don't think this is appropriate, and Duque has not sent us an application for joint operations. This means that he thinks that the alliance alone, with the power of the god of the wilderness at most, is enough to deal with the current situation. When it came to Duque, Alexstrasza was convinced, but she was also a little emotional. Pay attention. It is us 5-color dragons, not mortals, who have been entrusted with the duty of guarding this planet by the Titans. It is an unexpected surprise for mortals and native creatures to contribute to the protection of this world, not an obligation. The only ones who have the obligation to protect are us dragons and the various guardians. Proudly raising her chin, the queen ordered, Cleostras, you don't have to go to the dragon meeting. You stay and protect the red dragon egg in the sanctum. Yes, Your Majesty. Krasis lowered his dragon head. Alexstrasza spread her huge dragon wings that seemed to be able to cover a small town, spread them high, and disappeared from Krasis' sight in a few moments. She went to the top of the Wormris temple that towered into the clouds. It was not a simple flight. The Wormris temple had various layers of subspace defense. In fact, she had just passed through several spaces. Krasis curled up his body and did not even enter a state of pretend sleep. He could not help but think of Duque's report. As an old ally of the Wormris temple, Duque had always been very outstanding. This time, it was also him who reported the matter of the Twilight Dragon in advance. The Twilight Dragon, this was a dragon egg that could contaminate a normal 5-color dragon, and then promote the transformation, so that a dragon that should have become a 5-color dragon could mutate into a Twilight Dragon. This news made the Wormris temple highly vigilant, so there was the initiative of Krasis, the big boss of the Red Dragon clan, to personally guard the dragon egg. Worried, Krasis ordered the red dragon with a double-headed sword not far away, bring 3 more teams of Dragonians and half-dragons here. Chapter 1850. The Dragonborn answered on the spot, yes. Very soon, the Red Jade Holy Temple became a place where there was a sentry every few steps. Krasis himself, 150 Dragonborn, and 200 half-Dragonborn were in charge. Even if they were attacked by thousands of Twilight disciples, he was confident that they could hold out until Alexstrasza returned. However, his confidence soon disappeared with the sound of the siren. Woo woo woo. It was the Titan's horn. That was the highest level siren. It meant that the invading enemy was strong enough to destroy the dragon's sleep sanctum. Krasis pointed with his right claw and immediately saw black spots like sesame seeds in the far north of the magic mirror's field of vision. Soon, the black spots rapidly grew larger. Not only their shape, but even their color could be seen clearly. The purple scales with a tinge of pink in them made Krasis's dragon eyes narrow abruptly. Twilight dragons. Not just 3 or 2, but thousands of them. Krasis' rich experience in aerial combat told him that almost every Twilight Dragon here was equivalent to an adult chromatic dragon. If these Twilight Dragons were only a threat to the dragon's slumber shrine, then the larger dragons leading them were the real killing machines. First of all, it occupied the center of the entire line of sight. No matter how you looked at it, it would always be the focus. That was Nethario, the Wing of Death. He had an abnormally huge body, with a wingspan of at least 300 meters. His small mountain-level body that swelled up like a balloon was now covered in a layer of terrifying acid as if water had been poured over it. The acid seemed to be controlled by some secret method as it lingered on his huge body. This was not to defend against the enemy's attacks, but to dissolve the dragon limbs that were constantly growing out of his body. Krasis saw with his own eyes in the magic mirror that a dragon's claw that was not inferior to his own suddenly grew out of a hole in Nisario's chest. Then, it twitched violently in the corrosive acid, becoming thinner, and finally, completely dissolved. Netherio alone was enough to give the dragon's sleep sanctum a headache. Krasis also saw Sinestra, an ancient female black dragon who used to be extremely powerful. Obviously, she was already dead and had become a death dragon that even the chromatic dragons hated. How ironic. He clearly hated Netherio to death, but after he died and resurrected Netherio, he immediately followed Netherio obediently. Apart from these two familiar dragons, there were other commander-level dragons, Variona and Serenarian. Krasis felt that he wouldn't be able to win against either of them. Only a true dragon aspect would be able to suppress them. The top-notch evil dragon Netherio, the second-level Sinestra, plus 2 Twilight Dragons and thousands of Twilight Dragons, this lineup was definitely luxurious. Roar! In the upper levels of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza's huge dragon shadow rose first, followed by the Emerald Dragon King Izura, the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, and the new Magic King Kalegos. Following closely behind them were thousands of 4-colored giant dragons. Compared to the relatively simple purple light on the other side, the Dragon's Slumber Shrine's light was much more colorful. Alexstrasza had originally asked Onyxia to recruit dark dragons as subordinates. However, after 10,000 years of depravity, most of the adult dark dragons had become dragon villains. They were very disgusted with Onyxia, the so-called princess who brought shame to the black dragons and ran off to be the demigod Duke's mount. There was no dark dragon bird at all. Onyxia wasn't keen on power or taking in subordinates. The strongest subordinates were a bunch of unpresentable young dragons, and then there were fledglings, dark dragons, and draconians. So in theory, there were only 4 of the 5-colored dragons left, and the main force of the army was here today. It was certain that Netherio had led the Twilight Dragon army with the mentality of fighting a decisive battle. What surprised Krasis was that the new Earth aspect dragon Onyxia, who was also present at the meeting today, didn't fight. He didn't know if it was because of the rumor that she was afraid of her parents. Krasis wanted to fight with the queen he admired, but he was more aware of his responsibility. He was guarding the future of the Red Dragon army. Just as Krasis was secretly raising his guard, there was suddenly a shrill scream around him. Ah! All of a sudden, every Red Dragon warrior in the entire Red Jade Temple entered a state of combat readiness. They clenched their halberds and swords in their hands. Krasis let out a loud roar, and a surging draconic aura immediately filled the Ruby Jade Temple. Who? Come out! As he roared, he turned his head and ordered a draconian, quickly inform His Majesty to send more reinforcements here. He was very smart. He knew that the other party had chosen to attack head-on even though they knew he was here. This meant that the other party had absolute confidence in attacking, and not relying on cannon fodder to destroy the dragon eggs here. Krasis didn't know that fate had already taken a major turn. He had no idea how the other party had passed through the realm net of temple guards all over the Dragonbone Waste. The next second, a large number of Twilight Hammer believers poured in. Some attacked the Draconians, while others began to cast evil magic on the dragon eggs scattered throughout the sanctuary. Krasis, of course, immediately attacked these invaders, but he couldn't use breath or magic, because spells with a wide attack range would destroy the dragon eggs. He could only use the most basic physical methods such as grabbing. He wasn't too worried about the situation in front of him, because in terms of combat power, the Red Dragon Guards had the absolute advantage. And as several adult red dragons that were patrolling nearby received the news and rushed over, the battle suddenly became one-sided. It's safe. Just as Krasis had this thought, an adult red dragon in front of him was instantly torn apart. Scarlet blood spurted out of the dragon's head. Like a dying earthworm, it tumbled violently on the floor of the sanctuary before it hung down and stopped moving. Who? Krasis was shocked. He could clearly feel the powerful aura of the giant dragon outside the gate of the sanctuary. That was a terrifying aura that far surpassed that of the ancient dragon. Those who could have such power were all of the strongest in the dragon race. Usually, only the direct bloodline descendants of the Dragon King could have such strength. That kind of dark power was so dense that just feeling it made him shiver. For a second, Krasis almost thought that Onyxia had betrayed him, or that Nefarian had resurrected. Obviously not. A huge black dragon that he had never seen before stepped into the red dragon holy land. Hello. Cleistras, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lazio. Chapter 1851. In the face of a black dragon that had the right to call itself a prince, Croesus felt a lot of pressure. At that moment, he did not notice that a chaotic historical event that should not have happened was happening, or rather, had already happened. In the original history, before the cataclysm, there was an Azeroth version of Orphan Zhao. The red dragons were actually a race that was equivalent to the Virgin Mary. Among them, there was a dragon named Rheostasa who was looking for a pure black dragon egg that had not been invaded by evil. Because she was thinking, if she could somehow find a pure black dragon egg, then it could prove that the black dragons could still live freely in the world without being bewitched by the ancient gods. After all, the mission of the red dragons was to protect life. Getting rid of every black dragon in Azeroth was against their purpose. But if the red dragons could find a way to redeem the black dragons, then it meant that there was hope for them to continue living. The problem was that the wings of death had been corrupted by the ancient gods, and since the ancient war, he had been the enemy of his fellow dragons. The black dragons under his command had also become his minions. One after another, they had become a group of crazy, neurotic fallen black dragons. But would there be a dragon that could lay a pure dragon egg that was not affected by the ancient gods at all? And if it was not controlled by the wings of death and the evil power of the ancient gods, what would the future of this dragon be? So, the Virgin Mary red dragon Rheostasa caught a female black dragon, Nishiandra, and forced her to study how to lay eggs. In the end, she laid an egg, and it was a very rare egg that belonged to the wings of death, Nisario. For this matter, be it the wings of death who was frantically searching for this egg or the red dragons, they were all caught up in this whirlpool. Moreover, this egg had its own will even before it was born. When the egg, although not yet out of the shell, developed to a maturity level where it could think independently and carry out plans, it sent out a cry for help to a group of sneaky fellows who were proficient in stealing and could even come and go freely under the eyes of the red dragons, the thieves of Ravenholt Manor. Thus, there was a strange case of the dragon egg disappearing. After many twists and turns in the plot, the black dragon Prince Razio was born. With the help of all kinds of resources, he quickly grew into a powerful dark dragon and called himself the last dark dragon. In theory, he was both good and evil in the original history, and had a good relationship with King Anduin Rin. However, at the time note of the King of Draenor, he participated as the mastermind in rescuing Braindead Roar and letting Braindead Roar go to another timeline to cause trouble. All in all, this was a powerful, intelligent, and sinister dragon prince. Unfortunately, fate had its way with dragons. In this life, with Onyxia's cleansing, the title of the last normal black dragon would not fall onto Lachio. More importantly, without the protection of the red dragon tribe, Lachio wouldn't have the luxury to wander around the Dragon's Slumber Shrine, the Alliance, and other forces. So, Ratio, who was in front of Croesus, was obviously a henchman of the Wings of Death. No one knew that because of fate, Wing died prematurely. And the price of resurrection was the price of his own son smashing Nefarian. What was even more infuriating to Wing was that his disappointing traitorous woman had shamelessly knelt down and licked his great enemy, Duque, as a mount. So, after Nisario was resurrected by Enzos, he paid more attention to his children than ever before. So, in this life, there was no such thing as Nishiandra being forced to give birth to a pure dragon egg. Almost as soon as Wing regained his freedom, he found Nishiandra and directly left this female black dragon, who he had almost killed when he was having sex with her, with an evil child that truly belonged to him. Lachio, in this life, he was the successor of the new Black Dragon army, and appeared in the Dragon's Slumber Shrine as a symbol of absolute evil. As soon as he attacked, he directly beheaded an adult red dragon. This destructive power was simply frightening. Croesus was ready to risk his life. Just then, another voice suddenly broke in. I didn't expect that damned father of mine would actually give me a younger brother. This is really making me worried. Should I kill my younger brother to prevent him from fighting with me for the position of Earth Guardian? Or should I persuade him to be like me, to become a mount in exchange for the world's forgiveness. A graceful woman wearing a black robe with golden edges leisurely walked into the red jade shrine. The one who came in was naturally the black dragon princess Onyxia in her human form. The pentashade dragons each had their own holy lands in No Scent, because it was an absolute protection zone for nurturing the next generation. Even if Onyxia was now a dragon aspect, it was an absolute taboo to enter the dragon egg hatching area of another dragon race without permission. But Krasis couldn't care less. Onyxia was obviously here to help. The Black Dragon Princess suddenly cast the ultimate transformation spell, and in less than a second, she turned into a black dragon that was a size larger than Lachio and confronted him. Clairstraz, hurry up and kill those Twilight spellcasters. They want to pollute the dragon eggs. If necessary, even the dragon eggs must be purified with dragon breath. After saying that, Onyxia flapped her wings and pounced towards her younger brother. It was not uncommon for a battle between two demigod colossal dragons to turn into an earth-shattering one another. It was Duque who ordered her to save the day. If the Red Dragon race's dragon eggs were all destroyed by the shockwaves of the battle, the Red Dragon race would eventually go berserk. It would be better if she didn't come at all. The Black Dragon took a deep breath as soon as she opened her mouth. Although she was in her human form, she could use her ultimate move earlier if she accumulated fire elements in advance. The conical dragon breath of nearly 60 degrees Celsius was too much for Lachio to handle. The magic resistance of the pentashade dragons was quite high. Their tough dragon scales and dragon skin were born with high-purity elements. It was not easy to injure a dragon with elemental attacks. Often, dragons had to rely on physical combat to decide the outcome of a battle. Onyxia's deep breath seemed to have broken this rule. Lazio jumped backward as if he was jumping. His wings flapped continuously, and he almost screamed as he dodged this deep breath. How can it be so hot? Onyxia grinned and revealed a mocking smile. Don't you know who my master is? Chapter 1852. Ordinary flames could hardly threaten a real WIRM, let alone a demigod WIRM. Onyxia only knew how to use fire. Originally, with her aptitude, using the deep breath to its limit was not a big deal. Dealing with elites was indeed impressive, but dealing with commander-level enemies was starting to feel like it wasn't enough. This was determined by the upper limit of her vitality. Ever since Dumoke took control of the Land of Fire and became the master of the fire elemental world, everything had changed. Since he could generously transfer a portion of the elements to an outsider like Kale, he could not leave Onyxia behind. After all, she cooperated with him at all times. Whatever position he asked her to, the Black Dragon would do it. It wouldn't be a bad idea to occasionally have a more focused play. 5%. This was the amount of elements that Dumoke gave his mount. As the Land of Fire further integrated into the world of Azeroth, it communicated and complemented the fire elements of the entire world. In fact, the absolute amount of elements that this element took up was increasing by the day. Having external assistance and relying solely on one's own physical strength were two completely different things. At that time, Lachio also urgently spat out dragon breath to resist deep breath. Firstly, it was rushed, and secondly, there was an absolute difference in quality and quantity. The fire elements that he spat out were actually caught in midair by the more mysterious, deep breath, and rolled back to burn Lachio's dragon body. Ah! Lachio screamed and retreated from the passage to the Red Jade Holy Temple. He had to retreat. Onyxia, who was even larger in size, had already pounced forward. The Red Jade Holy Temple was located below the Dragon Sleep Temple. Although the space was not small even by the standards of a dragon, it was not suitable for a battle. For a dragon, most of the time, strength, agility, and vitality were directly proportional to its size. The larger the dragon, the stronger its overall attributes. In the limited space of the Red Jade Holy Temple, it could be forced to the point where there was nowhere to hide. It would become the most primitive wrestling. Looking at its size, Lachio knew that he was going to lose. He could only retreat out of the red jade holy temple and fight for space. Onyxia pounced after him. Lassio glanced at the battle in the sky north of the Dragonbone Waste and fled north without looking back. His father and mother were there, and according to the intelligence, they were the nemesis of his good sister. Although it was embarrassing, the dark dragon race was mostly people with no moral integrity. Losing face was better than losing one's life. Lazio flew north without looking back. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt his massive dragon body stagnate. It was the illusion of suddenly falling into a pool of paste. Impossible! Lassio exclaimed. What he said was impossible. He subconsciously believed that there was no existence that could use simple magic to imprison a demigod black dragon. That's not something a mortal can do. It wasn't something that a female black dragon like Onyxia who only knew how to play with fire would do. In his astonishment, Lassio twisted his snake-like neck and looked behind him. He saw something that made his soul jump out of his body. On Onyxia's dragon claws, there was a huge ring-like object. This should be some kind of magic tool. Lassio watched as his sister activated one of them, and then his body, which had just regained some mobility, immediately became sluggish again. Demigod tool. Normally, no demigod would inject a large amount of divine power to create a single-use magic tool. After all, it was quite exhausting and not beneficial. Coincidentally, there was a demigod who did this, and this demigod was undoubtedly Duque. He had engraved the Titan runes on the huge mithril ring so that he could instantly use the Titan's power to activate deceleration. That was equivalent to him casting a demigod spell himself. Even with the demigod dragon's magic resistance, there would be a moment of numbness. This was simply a waste, but in a battle between demigod dragons, this was undoubtedly the key factor that would tip the scales of victory. The massive black dragon princess seized the opportunity and pounced forward. She swept her dragon tail from a high angle and hit her brother's waist heavily. Every dragon's tail was different. Her dragon tail was just like a standard meteor hammer. Not to mention that the end was huge and oval, and there were a few extremely hard and thick spikes. Lassio immediately let out a wail. Not only was his left rib pierced, but he was also pulled by the force of the attack, leaving several deep wounds that exposed his bones. The violent blow caused him to fall from midair. He crashed into the snowy field full of dragon bones. His colossal body smashed through several dragon skeletons in an instant. It was as if his actions had disturbed the souls of the sleeping dragons, and the dragonbone wilderness seemed to make a dissatisfied grunt at that moment. Sorry. My stupid brother. Since I'm here, I won't let you go to the north. In midair, Onyxia, who was flapping her huge wings, stared coldly at her blood relatives. Other families would at most fight. The black dragon family was simply asking for death. Lassio knew that he had failed, not only in terms of strategy, but also in terms of combat power and combat experience. He was inferior to his sister in terms of elements. What was worse was that because of his age and lack of combat experience, he could not unleash his tyrannical physical fitness. It couldn't be helped. He was controlled by his father, Nesario, as soon as he was born. His father was not a benevolent father. He would slowly feed him moves and teach him how to fight. His father was an empty fish, and he directly ordered him to pollute the dragon eggs of the Red Jade Holy Temple and the other temples. If he did not do well, he would be killed. Originally, Krasis would be a good opponent and a good whetstone. Using the difference in rank, Lassio could hone his skills in actual combat, and while he was entangled with Krasis, the idiotic Twilight believers below could complete the task given by his father. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. But why did an enhanced version of his sister suddenly appear? This was clearly not giving him a way out. Completely afraid to approach his sister, Lassio struggled on the ground, turned around, and flew east. He did not realize that it was Onyxia who was hovering in the air just now, forcing him to fly to the east. He. My stupid brother. I wish I could say goodbye to you forever today. Onyxia glanced at the fierce battle in the northern sky, and then flew after Lassio. Lassio flapped his wings, and the more he flew, the more he felt that something was wrong. He used all his strength to fly, but he felt that his sister's Onyxia's speed should not be that low. Just as he flew over the Dragon's Pine River on the east side of the Dragonbone Waste, a large cluster of dense light suddenly approached at high speed. Boom! Lassio was hit by hundreds of cannonballs. Accompanied by the Black Dragon Prince's painful cry, he fell again and slammed into the ice of the Dragon's Pine River, breaking the ice by the river. He fell into the water. Chapter 1853. Trap. Everything was a trap. When Lassio's huge body fell into the water, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. Next to him, there was a huge water giant sitting in the river, hugging its legs. The river was not shallow, but compared to this underwater giant, it was like a small ditch. What made Lassio's heart palpitate was the strong waves of water elemental energy emitted from the giant. It was definitely not a small sea giant. That was, a dumb giant dragon actually fell into the river. Normally, it was very difficult to transmit sound underwater. However, this giant's voice directly entered Lassio's mind. Lassio almost peed his pants. He knew who this water giant with a strange golden chain on his chest was. It was the former lord of the water elemental realm, Neptulon. Lassio felt like he was being attacked by a dog. "You're the former lord of the water elemental realm. What are you doing in this river?" Neptulon grinned and rose to his feet. As he stood up, the water level of Dragon's Pine River, which had not changed for thousands of years, suddenly rose by 100 meters in 10 seconds. This was a very exaggerated number. Under normal circumstances, the banks on both sides of the river would definitely suffer. However, the water level only rose to the width of the river. The banks did not move at all. Neptulon was obviously trying to trap him. No. Wah. Lassio choked on a mouthful of water. At this moment, how could he not know that his opponent was here to kill him? He struggled to leave this strange water body. Unfortunately, he only managed to struggle for 3 seconds before several white lines of water closed in on him from afar. One of them was a petite female Naga, only slightly larger than a human. She was dressed in luxurious accessories, and judging from the golden crown on her head, she was at least a queen. The other one was a huge water elemental, and the last one was a huge and ugly strange fish. Neptulon, good job. This time, you've done a good job. The female Naga spoke with the voice of her soul. Neptulon's face showed a look of joy. It did not matter if it was fake or not. The Naga queen turned her head. Oh. It was actually the legendary Prince Ratio. What an honor to meet you. I am Queen Naga, the demigod of Lake Azeroth, Lord Emir, the Queen Regent of the tidal throne, Vashj. This is the first time we meet, and I believe it will also be the last time. With that, she raised her hand. Neptulon, Unstable Hydas, and Yusler, the 3 super thugs, grinned hideously as they pounced on Lachio. In the northern sky, an incomparably tragic internal war of the Dragon Clan was going on. As far as the eye could see, there were gorgeous and dazzling dragon breaths and flashing magic spells everywhere, and the air was filled with entangled battles. Whether it was the Wyvern Guardian of the Dragon's Slumber Shrine or the Twilight Wyvern belonging to Nesario, they were all bloodthirsty, and used the fiercest means to deal with these enemies who were theoretically their compatriots. Perhaps the moment they met, a large cloud of murky and stinky blood rain would fall from the sky, or even scattered pieces of internal organs. With a flash, the dragon claw slashed down, and perhaps an entire row of ribs was neatly severed. In terms of combat experience, the 4-color dragon warriors were obviously superior to the Twilight Wyvern. The aerial combat experience accumulated over the years was not something that the Twilight Wyvern, who grew up on stimulants and pills, could compare to. In the initial battle, the 4-color dragon and the Twilight Wyvern had a shocking battle loss ratio of 1:10. However, the Dragon's Slumber Coalition army immediately discovered that something was wrong. The strength and physical fitness of the Twilight Wyvern were comparable to that of the 4-color dragon. Their special ability was to create a unique twilight domain space, and use this space to crazily absorb energy from the outside world to promote their own growth. As long as there was enough energy for them to absorb, they could grow rapidly. It only took a few months or even a few weeks for a twilight wyvern to hatch to adulthood, but it took hundreds or thousands of years for an ordinary dragon to hatch to adulthood. The terror of having Nesario in charge was reflected at this time. This was a terrifying characteristic that did not exist in the original history. Enzos had bestowed a terrifying halo effect on the wings of death. This terrifying halo, which covered an area of more than 10 kilometers, greatly strengthened the twilight domain of each twilight wyvern. Not only was the domain larger, but the effect was also more amazing. As long as any energy transfer occurred in the twilight domain, the energy would be absorbed. Whether it was the aftermath of magic that was cast, or the flesh and blood that fell from mid-air and passed through this space. Whether it was the four-color dragons or the twilight wyverns, as long as it was energy, it would be absorbed without any resistance. Many of the dragons found that their opponents suddenly swelled up as if they were inflated, and then their speed, agility, and vitality skyrocketed as if they had been injected with chicken blood. At first, the twilight wyverns did not have any brains and only knew how to fight by instinct. However, after a few rounds, as long as they did not die, they could use the energy absorbed from their surroundings to repair their bodies, and learn new tricks from their opponents to deal with the four-color dragon. Soon, the battle-loss ratio between the two sides changed dramatically. From the initial 1-10, it became 1-3. Sister. The sleeping dragon temple is finished. Isera shouted. Alexstrasza, of course, knew that it would not work, but she really could not spare her hands. King against king, general against general, soldier against soldier. Just Nesario, who was as huge as a mountain, was enough for the few dragon aspects to suffer. Not to mention the addition of Sinestra, and the two twilight wyverns, Varian and Serenarian, who were quite capable of fighting. Varian and Serenarian were not as strong as the dragon aspects, but they could steadily suppress the ancient wyvern of the four-color dragon. After a few rounds, 3 ancient wyverns had been seriously injured and forced to retreat. In fact, if it were not for Nesario frantically chasing after his 3 former siblings, the Sleeping Dragon Coalition army would have suffered even more losses. At this time, a black dragon's shadow suddenly entered the field of vision of the two sides. Your Majesty Alexstrasza, the Ruby Jade Temple was ambushed by the Black Dragon Prince Ratio, but I took care of him. Now it is basically safe. The first half of Onyxia's words made the Red Dragon Queen's heart jump to her throat, but the second half made her feel for the first time that this junior was quite useful. The Black Dragon turned her head and taunted the 2 Twilight Wyverns who were obviously several sizes larger. Humph. Varian and Serenarian, right? Poor guys. He didn't know anything and was used as a weapon. Do you think you are very strong? Let me tell you, I can fight 10 of you guys. It was a clumsy provocation, but for the relatively simple Twilight Wyverns, it was good enough as long as it worked. In an instant, Onyxia had pulled away 2 of the enemy's main forces. Before leaving, she also sent a message to the Red Dragon Queen. Duque requests to join the battle. Chapter 1854. Duque. Alexstrasza really had a love-hate relationship with Duque. Once upon a time, Duque was just such a small and weak human. At that time, she hung out with Duque purely because she felt that this human was interesting. It was easy to get tired of living after living for too long. This was not a derogatory term, but a literal one. If it was not for the power and responsibility given to her by the Titans, she really did not know how she had lived for the past 25,000 years. Perhaps she would have developed strange interests like some blue dragons. For example, falling in love with a well, or falling in love with the fairy sister, soul healer, in the graveyard. After seeing all kinds of situations in the mortal world, her dragon life only had a few interests left, curiosity and excitement. Of course, she would not put herself in danger just to experience the feeling of heartbeat just for the sake of pure excitement. Because of the novelty and excitement, it was more like a hobby outside of fulfilling her duty as a guardian. That was why she did not hesitate to help Duke. Perhaps it was to repay a debt of gratitude, or perhaps it was purely to see how far this little human who always surprised her could go. She did not expect that in a mere 20 years, not even 1,000th of her life as a dragon guardian, Duke Marcus, a human with meager strength at the beginning, had grown to a level comparable to her. Alexstrasza was a little conflicted. She was happy that Duque was strong. He was too strong. She was conflicted. She always felt that she had lived for 25,000 years in vain. Why could it not compare to what Duque had achieved in 1,000th of her time? Living for too long, living for too long. Dragon hearts would become a little conflicted. Mortals clearly looked very simple, so why did a monstrous peerless powerhouse like Duque appear? Not only was he strong, but he could also stir up the general trend of the entire world. Even she felt that all the dragon guardians and guardians were led by the nose by him. However, every single one of them was willing to do so because his actions were righteous and in line with the way of the heavens and the way of the Titans. Sometimes, when Alexstrasza looked at Onyxia, who had a terrible reputation and was cunning, and saw her intelligence plummet after being subdued by Duque, she would see a rare joy on Onyxia's face that was almost impossible for dragons to have. She couldn't help but put herself in Onyxia's shoes. If he became Duque's mount like Onyxia, would he? Every time she thought of this, the queen would feel like her heart was in a mess. This was practically a blasphemy against the duties of a Titan. She found it difficult to describe the complex feelings in her heart, but she forcefully pushed them out of her mind. Time returned to the present. For a moment, she was distracted, and she was almost hit by Nicerios's huge claws. Fortunately, although Nicerios's body size had increased, his speed and agility seemed to have decreased significantly, which gave her a chance to save him. She screamed in her heart, "I can't hesitate anymore. I am the leader of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. All the dragons are waiting for my command. A leader must never hesitate." As far as the eye could see, countless dragons were fighting in the sky. She already knew how terrifying the twilight dragons were. 10,000 years ago, Nicerio had betrayed the Pentashade dragons, and the dragons that had once blotted out the sky had withered because of that battle. It took the four-color dragons 10,000 years to barely restore their numbers to a less miserable state. If she cared about her pride and hoped to use the power of the Dragon Slumber Shrine to deal with the resurrected traitor, Nicerio, she was afraid that the Dragon Slumber Shrine would suffer more damage than the last time. The enemy in front of her was strong, and she was weak. Even if she won, it would only be a Pyrrhic victory. What about the void battlefield in the future? Alexstrasza gritted her dragon teeth and spread her divine thoughts. Duque. I know you're here. Come and help. I know what you're thinking. The Dragon Slumber Shrine will be the most loyal ally of the Alliance in the future. Her spiritual call instantly received a reply. Yo. I wanted to make a move a long time ago, but I was afraid of interfering with the internal affairs of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Pfft. You make it sound like you didn't have a part in the first siege against Nicerio. The man and the dragon teased each other. Everyone knew that the little knot in their hearts had disappeared without a trace. Originally, the Dragon Slumber Coalition army did not know how the Alliance would make a move, but they soon found out. Woo woo woo. It was a strange sound coming from the east of the Dragonbone Wilderness. Many twilight dragons turned their heads to look to the east in a daze, but the four-color dragons came to their senses and squatted down with their hands on their heads. Oh, no, it was a gesture of self-defense. Countless artillery shells gathered into a torrential rain of artillery shells that were denser than locusts. They crossed a distance of 10,000 meters and blasted toward the area where the dragons were fighting fiercely in midair. At a glance, the Alliance's artillery was simply a trap for its allies. This was an indiscriminate attack. In midair, the four-color dragons and the twilight dragons were all wrestling with each other, and there was no obvious formation to distinguish. At most, it was a cooperation between a few dragons in twos and threes. It was not a positional battle like in a traditional war. But the moment the artillery shells exploded, the essence of Duque's bombardment could be seen. All the artillery shells were the classic, Type 3 bullets. This kind of shotgun shot out from a standard barrel would explode when it flew into the air of the battle, forming a large number of fragments. For enemies with relatively weak bodies, this was a fatal metal storm. Even if it was a griffin, its skin would be lacerated and its wings would be crippled in this kind of storm. For a giant dragon that was covered in dragon scales and dragon skin that could be said to have thick skin and flesh, and even the dragon's eyes had a layer of extremely hard cornea, the lethality of the shrapnel was almost zero. More importantly, these artillery shells were all specially made for the holy light. The Twilight Dragon's twilight domain was derived from the classic power of corruption. It was a perfect counter to the holy light. This meant that the four-colored dragons were completely fine, while the Twilight Dragons cried out in pain as if they had been splashed with acid. It was like a cooperative game. As long as the option, friendly damage, was not ticked, you could casually stab your teammates and be fine. It seemed very unscientific, but it happened just like that. This is amazing. Isura could not help but exclaim. What did the Twilight Dragons rely on to become stronger and stronger? Wasn't it that disgusting Twilight Domain? Once the Twilight Domain was suppressed, the four-colored dragons began to gain the upper hand again. In the sky above the Dragon's Pine River in the east, a huge fleet was circling the flying fortress Naxxramas. In fact, at the moment, less than half of the fleet fired their cannons. Naxxramas's secondary cannons were firing. In the command room, Tyron's beautiful eyes darted around. Duque, did you expect that Lesio would attack the Red Jade Holy Temple? Beside her, Duque shrugged. How could that be? I only expected that Nesio would choose to attack the dragon eggs of the four-colored dragons. Chapter 1855. To be honest, he really did not think that sending Oni would actually catch Lachio. In fact, he did not even know if Lachio still existed in this world. Unfortunately, Tyron pouted and crossed her arms, looking as if she did not believe him. Duque almost choked to death. Damn! Is this considered pretending to be the god of prophecy too much that people don't believe me even if I fail? At this time, Vasht's magic message came. That new black dragon Prince Lachio is almost done. What should we do? In the magic mirror, Vasht's red hair floated in the water, giving off a different kind of sexiness. Duque was not in the mood to appreciate it. He rubbed his chin, weighing the impact of Lachio's life and death. No matter how he thought about it, Lachio did not seem to have done anything good, nor did he really affect the general trend of history. To put it bluntly, he was the kind of guy who was an eyesore, but it did not seem to be a problem to kill him. Duque hesitated for 3 seconds, then made a throat-cutting salute. Remember to annihilate his soul. In the scene, the Black Dragon Prince, who was supposed to be a part of history, was dancing in the water. He was dragged deeper and deeper into the water by Neptulin, who was a rough man underwater. He was tossed and turned by the waves, and he sank deeper and deeper into the water. Lachio was chased all the way from Dragon's Pine River to the sea by a group of ferocious underwater bosses, through the east side of the ancient beach, and all the way to the deepest trench. A dragon soaring in the sky falling into the water was a huge mistake in itself. Now, Lachio had to pay the price in advance for his undisplayed ambition and possible mistakes. Perhaps this was unfair to a formidable dragon, but since he had chosen Nisario's side, then he was sorry. Hydas, Tidewalker, Yusler, and Neptulin swarmed forward. They continuously used various water attacks to create wounds on Lachio's body, weakening his vitality. When his speed and strength dropped drastically, Marogri the Tidewalker threw a huge anchor into his waist. Then, Neptulin threw a thick black chain and strangled his neck. Then, Hydas covered his limbs with high-purity water elemental energy. Finally, Yusler pounced on him and bit his neck. Spare me. That was Lacio's last plea. It was too late. Pfft. The dignified Black Dragon Prince died sullenly in the deep sea. Vasht quietly sat in the shallow waters, casting spells as she gazed at the offering in the sea. She was suppressing and erasing Lacho's soul. On the east side of Dragon's Pine River, a neat array of cannons kept firing. The artillery finally angered Nesario, who ordered the Twilight Dragons to attack the Alliance's air force. Under his command, Valriona and Thanarian, who were being kited by Onyxia, turned around and flew east towards the Alliance's air force. An ear-piercing alarm sounded in Naxxramas almost instantly. Unlike the previous Level 2 alarm, it was preparation for an attack. This was the alarm for an enemy attack. The Alliance soldiers in the intelligence room of the stronghold observed the incoming enemy through the mage's eyes in Dragonbone Waste, as well as the stronghold's own enemy tracking system and binoculars. They stared dumbfoundedly at the dragons in the sky. The Alliance had experienced many battles since its establishment. Since Naxxramas fell into the hands of the Alliance, it had also experienced several battles, but it had never tried to fight such a large group of dragons. The last time it faced a large-scale attack was in Northrend, against the gargoyles of the Lich King Arthas. The purple-red Twilight Dragons approached quickly. They spread their wings and rode the wind, sweeping over from the battlefield 10 kilometers away. 10 kilometers, which was 10,000 meters, sounded very far. For these flying behemoths, it would only take a few minutes. They're really fast. Bulang Bronzebeard stared at this scene on the monitor and couldn't help but curl his lips. Boys, use the armor-piercing bullets. Grenades are useless against these big guys. The 3 holy light projectiles had been proven to only be used for harassment, not to kill them. Bulang shouted, old-style main cannons. Fire in unison. Cannonballs triggered by TNT explosives were continuously fired from the muzzles of the stronghold. Even though the new cannons were all equipped with brakes to reduce the reaction force, they didn't dare to fire in a real sense. The continuous impact still caused the entire stronghold to move nearly 10 meters to the east. Under the surveillance cameras controlled by the observers, Bulang clearly saw that the old-style cannonballs, even after being treated with holy light, still couldn't penetrate the tough skin and scales of the Twilight Dragons. Although some of the Twilight Dragons' wings were damaged, they only slowed down. Anyway, after a round of cannonballs that seemed to shake the earth, not a single Twilight Dragon fell in midair. The human gunners could almost see the contempt at the corners of the Twilight Dragons' mouths. Taking advantage of the intermission of the human cannons, these dragon-shaped monsters created with evil secret methods quickly closed the distance between them and the flying stronghold. Many of the Alliance soldiers' hearts were about to jump out of their chests at this moment. If the Alliance's cannons couldn't cause effective damage to the enemy, it meant that this was likely to turn into a massacre of the Alliance's air force. At this time, Duque's leisurely voice sounded. Bulang, relax. Don't we still have Mimran? Yes. According to my calculations, the new cannonballs can definitely penetrate those purple lizards flying in the sky. Mimran, who looked like a mechanical gnome, had 2 light bulb eyes that kept flashing. That's right, Duque was King crazy about the Alliance's technology tree again. The biggest feature of transmigrators adding talent points was that they wouldn't add the wrong talent points. In fact, 1 kilometer behind the group of Twilight Dragons, Izura was leading a large group of green dragons to help the Alliance. Sister, I don't think we need to help Duque's side. Whether we need to or not is one thing, whether we go or not is another. Go quickly, don't be in a straight line with the Twilight Dragons and the Alliance's cannons. Follow them from the side and back. If necessary, help at any time, Alexstrasza instructed. The main force of the Twilight Dragons had turned east, which meant that the pressure on the 4-colored dragons was greatly reduced. In theory, concentrating all the dragons to besiege Nesario was the right way to go, but she couldn't let such a large group of Twilight Dragons run around. In fact, except for Izura, who was particularly confident in Duque, many green dragons didn't think that mere mortals could block thousands of Twilight Dragons with their flying creations alone. In their eyes, the thin 3-dimensional defense line of the Alliance's flying fleet was no match for the locust-like Twilight Dragons, be it in terms of strength or visual effects. In particular, when the Alliance's first round of main cannons fired did not even bring down a single Twilight Dragon, most of the Green Dragons in the Green Dragon army confirmed their thoughts. Chapter 1856. After all, they were a group of true dragons that were charging over aggressively. Regardless of whether they were products of accelerated growth or not, they were not a bunch of buzzing locusts, but creatures at the top of the food chain on planet Azeroth. Under everyone's gazes, the purplish-red ominous dragon cloud was getting closer and closer to the Alliance's air fleets and strongholds. Everyone knew that unless it was a dragon that was good at magic, a dragon's attack range was basically no more than 200 meters. Beyond 200 meters, the dragons could only passively take a beating. Once within 200 meters, the giant dragons would use their dragon breath, their powerful bodies, their sharp claws, and their tails, which were even more terrifying than siege hammers, to teach anyone who dared to enter the giant dragon's killing range a lesson. Apart from a few powerful creatures like golems, most existences would only feel the deepest despair and helplessness when faced with a dragon at close range. It was the same for the Alliance's battleships. If the largest main cannon could not penetrate the dragon's scales and skin, then the smaller cannons and anti-aircraft cannons would not be able to do so. At this moment, the Alliance's strongholds and battleships suddenly flashed with a blinding light. The Alliance had fired again. No one took this volley of cannons seriously. The purplish-red dragon cloud that looked like it was rolling over finally collided with the dense black dots formed by the cannonballs. Just as the new cannonball was fired, Duque smiled and said, "Actually, dragon scales and skin are fine. We might as well change our way of thinking and treat them as more durable sloped armor. As long as we find the right way, it's easy to penetrate them." "Oh. Is that so?" Bulang stroked his beard. The great gnome craftsman Jurban was also scratching his bald head. Why did the dwarves and gnomes like Duque so much? Wasn't it because Duque could always give them a lot of scientific inspiration, allowing their most beloved technology to advance? Duque had many ideas, and they were even more creative than Mimiran's bold and imaginative ideas. What was even more impressive was that most of Duque's ideas were feasible. Duque's words had undoubtedly opened a new window for the two of them. Even Mimir began to mutter to himself. The speed of the cannonball was very fast. If one's eyesight was good enough, they would discover that the cannonball was actually just a flying tool. It was just that it was faster. The cutting-edge cannonballs tore through the atmosphere at high speed. Some of the cannonballs even left long white lines as they passed through the clouds. The metallic afterimages pulled out beams of light in the air and pierced into the group of twilight dragons like sharp blades. This time, these creatures that came from the Black Dragon King's family's black technology laboratory were not so lucky. In an instant, their wings or bodies were pierced. Perhaps it was because of the amount of gunpowder in the shell, or some other reason. Only about 100 twilight dragons howled as they fell from the sky, sprinkling a foul and evil rain of blood. Even so, there was a burst of loud and clear cheers in the fortress command. "Hooray! Success! We've finally defeated those damned lizards." He had only killed less than 100 twilight dragons, which was a negligible loss for a group of more than 3,000 dragons. Hidden behind this small victory was the victory of mortals and technology. The Alliance's technology continued to develop, and today, they could already use their own new inventions to deal with the creatures at the top of the food chain on this planet, the giant dragons. It was not difficult to envision that in the near future, weapons that could kill demons on a large scale could be developed. This was what encouraged the party of technology, which was led by the dwarves and gnomes. Jurban almost jumped in front of Duque and shook hands with Duque. "Congratulations, your tungsten core armor-piercing shell was a success." Duque replied with a smile, "It's our tungsten core armor-piercing shell." Jurban said with great sincerity, "No. Without your idea, none of us would have thought of such a method. We're just the processors of science." Duque said something extremely cool. "Then, I'm actually just standing on the shoulders of the giants of science." At this moment, even Bulang, who was commanding, and Mimiran, who was watching the battle, as well as the dwarves, gnome scientists, and craftsmen, were all in awe of Duque. The tungsten core armor-piercing shell was something that Duque had created using his transmigrator knowledge. The tungsten core armor-piercing shell was actually an excellent armor-piercing shell developed after the 1970s on Earth. The warhead of this armor-piercing shell used the principle of shell removal and the new structure and materials of high-density tungsten alloy. It had characteristics such as high initial velocity, low trajectory, short flight time, high accuracy, and great penetration power. It could effectively deal with fast-moving targets. The density of the core was high, and it was the complete opposite of hard steel or tungsten carbide cores that would shatter during the penetration process. The tungsten alloy core was more malleable and could penetrate armor by splashing. It had excellent secondary penetration characteristics, and it was more effective against large angles, sandwich, and multi-layered composite armor. It was widely used in large-caliber guns and small-caliber artillery shells at home and abroad as ammunition against lightly armored targets such as armored transport vehicles and attack helicopters. It just so happened that Azeroth had discovered the tungsten, and Duque had conveniently used it. Originally, with the industrial foundation of the Alliance, it was not enough to produce such a beautiful tungsten core armor-piercing shell. With Mimiran's workshop, this problem was easily solved. However, to avoid provoking the Dragon's Slumber Temple, Duque had deliberately ordered the armor-piercing shell to be filled with less gunpowder and not use additional fragmentation structures. However, Duque had ordered the engraving of some fire elemental runes. Otherwise, this round of bombardment alone would have been enough to teach those stupid Twilight Dragons a lesson. If they survived, they would have to remember to take a detour when they saw the Alliance's warships in the future. In fact, the Twilight Dragons that were hit this time, unless they were especially unfortunate and had been hit by dozens of cannons, they would not die. Most of the Twilight Dragons that were shot would be injured but not killed. It was not the kind of fatal injury, but the kind that just happened to penetrate the dragon's scales and skin, but could not penetrate the flesh. Stimulated by this round of bombardment, the Twilight Dragons immediately roared and accelerated towards the Alliance's fleet. On the other side, the Green Dragon army was also shocked. Seeing that although the Twilight Dragons had suffered losses, their losses were limited. They actually felt an inexplicable sense of peace. Ah! It turned out that mortals were not particularly powerful. In their hearts, the Green Dragons could not help but acknowledge the strength of the Alliance. Just as the Twilight Dragons flew to within a kilometer of Naxxramas and the flying fleet, the fortress and the large spaceships suddenly opened their hatches one by one, revealing the real killer move inside. The entire airspace suddenly flashed with an incomparably dazzling fire. Chapter 1857. In the flying magic city of Dalajan, there were thousands of magic cannons of various calibers and different elemental power outputs. In the mouth of the dragons, the magic cannons that these humans and elves were so proud of were called weak, because they were the most superficial use of the elements. In order to ensure the stability and operability of the cannons, the magic craftsmen had to repeatedly reduce the total output of the elements and reduce their fluctuations. And the high-level mysteries would undoubtedly crush the low-level mysteries. This kind of magic cannon with low elemental energy and elemental density was, of course, regarded as a toy by the dragons. Now, all history had been rewritten. After all, if there were genuine fire elemental creatures as cannons, who would need a special cannon to guide the fire elemental? That's right. Standing in front of the wide-open cabin doors were fat fire elemental beings that were docilely standing in a battle formation. These fire elemental creatures burned thousands or even tens of thousands of degrees all over their bodies. Their existence itself was a great pressure on the surrounding environment. For example, without those special frost protection circles, not to mention Naxxramas, it was estimated that the decks of those big ships would melt. With those circles, the fire elemental creatures inside would be extremely unhappy. In the past, these irascible guys would definitely give the mages who controlled them a headache. Now, under the supervision of the fire demon troops directly under the King of Flames, Duque, these simple-minded fire elemental creatures stood like obedient babies. After studying the attack range of the fire elemental creatures, Bulang, the master of artillery, endured until the last kilometer before opening the hatch. It was not until the last 500 meters that he gave the order to open fire. Thick flaming arms rose up, and the purest and most primitive fire elements shot out from their palms. In the void near each battleship with fire elemental creatures, more fire elements could be seen connecting here through the void channel. From a distance, each battleship looked like a Titan battleship wrapped in a huge flame rune network. Whoosh! 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 There was no deafening roar of the cannons, but the fire elements that poured out in 3 or 4 breaths had a terrifying destructive power far beyond that of conventional artillery. From the 10 rows of hatches in the Naxxrama's stronghold, in addition to the full firepower of 300 battleships, these tens of thousands of fire elemental elites were enough to boil the entire airspace. You can't hit the Twilight Wyvern when it's in rapid evasion? Never mind. If he couldn't hit the front, he could still hit the back. Even if he missed, he could at least increase the density of fire elements in the air. What was an explosion? An explosion would release a large amount of energy in an extremely short period of time, producing a high temperature and releasing a large amount of gas. It causes a high-pressure chemical reaction or state change in the surrounding medium, and is extremely destructive at the same time. Generally speaking, this required a small space. Duque's fighting style was even more imposing. He commanded the fire elemental creatures to heat up the space that the Twilight Dragon was about to pass through. It was a vast space with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. There was no obstruction or separation, and a strong wind blew past. Normally, this would be impossible to achieve. But as the actual controller of the 3 great elemental realms of Azeroth, water, fire, and wind, turning the impossible into the possible was what Duque was doing. On an open-air platform to the west of Naxxrama's, 2 blonde and 1 silver-haired elven women stood there, letting the wind blow their long hair. If you carefully sensed it, you would know that the wind demigod, the 3 Windrunner sisters, led by Sylvanas, were controlling the flow of the air in the surrounding atmosphere. A huge wind elemental shield that the Twilight Wyvern couldn't see was preventing the fire elements from escaping. Then, everything fell into place. Heat up. Heat up. Heat up again. From an ordinary fireball of a few hundred degrees, the surrounding temperature suddenly rose to over 1,000 degrees. At first, the simple-minded Twilight Wyvern didn't react, only thinking that it was an illusion. When the surrounding temperature suddenly jumped from 1,000 degrees to 2,000 degrees, they finally felt that something was wrong. This wasn't normal, this wasn't the temperature that should belong to the mortal world. They began to roar and ask their companions what was going on with their dragon language. But their recklessness and lack of discipline caused them to be in chaos. Because the sky echoed, "Can't even stand this temperature, you're a pig." Such mockery, and even the thick-skinned Twilight Wyvern took the initiative to eat a fireball or 2, declaring that their magic resistance was high enough. When they found that in just a few seconds, the temperature soared to 3,000 degrees, the Twilight Wyverns finally panicked. They asked their leader, Valerian and Serenarian, one after another. But these 2 guys were also weirdos. Valerian and Serenarian, who had miraculously grown up, were supposed to serve as role models for the new generation of Twilight Wyverns, leading their offspring to devour the life of Azeroth. However, they always wasted their unparalleled power on fighting and quarreling. One said to turn around and run, the other said to continue forward. It was in such a quarrel that the Twilight Wyverns completely lost their last chance to escape. Boom! From a distance, Naxxrama's looked like a terrifying main cannon with a diameter of more than 1 kilometer, powerful enough to destroy the world. This was the result of the 3 Queen Sylvanas sisters' efforts to use the wind element to make elemental guidance. When a huge amount of fire elements accumulated and exploded, Queen Sylvanas let the fire elements pour towards the west side of the Twilight Wyverns. It looked like a huge, short-barreled gun had fired towards the west. It was just that the power was comparable to a mushroom cloud. Even the initiators of the explosion, the Alliance soldiers, the fire demons, and the fire elemental creatures themselves were a little unsure that this explosion was their own masterpiece. The entire Alliance fleet was silent for a full 3 seconds before bursting into thunderous cheers. Hooray! Ha ha ha! You're dead. I think they're all dead. This is what you get for looking down on us mortals. Many Alliance soldiers took off their helmets and hats and threw them into the air. Well, forget about the hats, the helmets hit a lot of people when they fell due to gravity. This was a man-made fiery hell. They were dealing with the dragons at the top of the food chain on this planet. Of course, this could also be seen as a joint attack by the fire and wind elementals against the Twilight Wyverns. In fact, Duque did not directly attack, and Queen Sylvanas' attack was the icing on the cake. Duque believed that even if Queen Sylvanas did not attack, the result would be quite glorious. Just to be on the safe side, they did not want the fire elements to flow back and blow back to Naxxramas and the flying battleship, so the 3 Windrunner sisters attacked. Chapter 1858. The result of the battle was glorious. This attack, which could be described as strangling or incinerating, lasted for a full 10 breaths in the air. If this was a classic aerial battle between dragons, there would probably be a rain of dirty blood, dragon scales, dragon skin, body parts, and organs that should have been priceless. Unfortunately, there was none. Only a small group of Twilight Wyrms with the strongest magic resistance could withstand the ultra-high temperature flames with their Twilight domain. The Twilight realm wasn't omnipotent. When the energy transmitted exceeded the limit of what one could withstand, an even more exaggerated explosion would occur. From start to finish, the energy burst out from every organ of the Twilight Dragon that could store energy, forming a larger second explosion. It looked more like a chain explosion. The lucky ones were directly swallowed by the fire elements and turned into burnt chickens, falling from the sky. The unlucky bastard had unluckily activated the Twilight domain in time and absorbed too much energy. As a result, he had been blown up and died without a complete corpse. Everyone who witnessed this scene was stunned, be it the Alliance who led the battle or the Green Dragon army who were just bystanders. The dazzling flames didn't last long, and the death realm of fire quickly dissipated after losing its support. The Twilight Dragon was still wandering in the air like a wandering ghost, not knowing what to do. Now, there were only 3 to 5 of them left. The charcoal-like Variona and Serenarian were completely stunned. After coming back to their senses, they continued to fight among themselves. "It's all your fault. I said that we wouldn't have to die if we retreated. It's all your fault. We should have just charged forward." The 2 Twilight Dragon leaders were like idiots trying to drag each other down. They didn't realize that the Green Dragon army had split up behind them. The main force had already started to fly back, but Isura and a few ancient green dragons started to climb rapidly and dive down. Oh! What a perfect timing! Isura glanced at the black figure that was diving down from the northeast at about the same height as her. Onyxia might not be good at fighting enemies head-on, but when it came to bullying noobs, no one was better than her. When Variona and Serenarian abandoned her and stopped chasing, she didn't pursue them. Instead, she followed Duque's theory of aerial combat and pursued height. Diving down from a high place was always easier than climbing up from a low place, and it was also more powerful. As a dragon aspect that controlled a portion of the fire elemental world's elements, Onyxia only needed a single thought for the fire elemental elements around her to follow her as she dove down at high speed. The fire elemental elements that had already begun to dissipate were sucked into her body at a speed faster than her dive. Her true form was that of a black dragon. From afar, Onyxia looked like a huge red dragon, drawing a cone-shaped formation of flames in the air. When she swooped down at high speed, she actually pulled out a long line of fire that resembled the tail of a comet. It looked as if it had already split the entire sky. The ferocious attack startled Valriona and Cenarian. The 2 Twilight Dragons, who had been dragging each other down, did something extremely stupid. Seeing that they couldn't dodge Onyxia's attack no matter how fast they accelerated, they actually tried to use each other's bodies to block the Black Dragon's first attack. One should not be afraid of a godlike enemy, but a pig-like teammate. Onyxia might look like she was going all out, but she actually cherished her life more than anyone else. Unfortunately, the Twilight Dragons didn't know that. When she reached the peak of her speed, a huge amount of fire elemental elements gathered in front of her dragon's head. It looked like a fire spear extending from the black dragon's head. Bam! Bam! This was the second consecutive attack that shook the atmosphere. Onyxia's larger body crashed into the middle of the two Twilight Dragons who seemed to be dancing a pas de deux. If one of the dragons had the guts to extend its claws and give Onyxia a vicious blow, it might have ended in a lose-lose situation. However, both Valriona and Cenarian's reaction at the last moment was to run. They only opened up half of their Twilight domain to defend themselves, but they were also afraid that they would absorb too much fire elemental elements and blow themselves up. That was hilarious. If Onyxia had split the fire elemental elements she brought with her into two, either of them would have been able to handle it. But how could the Black Dragon, who was an expert at bullying noobs, give them the chance to do so? Hee hee. Don't even think about escaping. Onyxia, who had not used her full strength in the first place, did a rather damaging thing. She did split the power in her body into two, but all the fire elemental elements were aimed at Cenarian while she pounced at Valriona. According to Duke's secret instructions when he was training the dragon, plus her own observations, she was very sure that the two of them would never cover for each other. As expected. Cenarian's first reaction was to run when he saw the overwhelming amount of high-purity fire elemental elements coming at him. But Valriona's first reaction was to face it angrily. The energy theory of aerial combat was fully validated at this moment. Onyxia, who was faster, flew in a small arc and easily dodged Valriona's clumsy bite, as well as her follow-up claw attack. Then, the Black Dragon used the inertia from the high-speed dive to make an emergency hover with her wings and swung her thick and long tail in a perfect semicircle, hitting Valriona's right arm hard. It was better to break one than to injure 10 fingers. She learned how Duque treated her in the past and used it to deal with her enemies. The force of a dragon aspect's attack, coupled with the huge inertia from the acceleration of gravity, was more than 100 tons. It was a blow that could even shatter a mountain. Valriona let out the most miserable scream since the start of the battle. Not only her right arm, but half of her body, including her right arm and chest, was blasted into pieces. The sharp spikes on the Black Dragon's meteor hammer-like tail even tore a few pieces of Valriona's lung tissue out. She tried to retaliate in pain and anger, but the Black Dragon dodged her attack. This time, Onyxia was very patient. Her larger dragon body circled Valriona in the air and attacked more agilely. Almost every time, she would grab the collapsed right side of Valriona's body to attack, constantly increasing the damage. Victory was only a matter of time. Cenarian, on the other hand, had to expand his Twilight domain to the maximum after taking all the fire elemental attacks from Onyxia. He would either overexert himself or be seriously injured by the second flame bombardment. He obviously chose the former. Chapter 1859. Serenarian was about to run away. Unfortunately, he was discovered by Nesario. The terrifying wings of death roared, and Serenarian had no choice but to turn around and rush back to the Alliance fleet. The Alliance fleet was in a panic. Be it the new cannonballs or the fire elemental elite's flame attacks, the limited counterattacks could not cause fatal damage to a demigod dragon commander. Even if this was a short-lived demigod dragon that had forcibly increased its strength. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. Hood is about to be attacked head-on by the enemy's dragon commander. Please advise. The communications soldier broke out in a cold sweat. Not to mention the communications girl on the hood, even the captain was sweating. The scientific creations of humans and dwarves could not compare to dragons in terms of mobility. They could not beat it, nor could they run away. If they got close, they would die. However, in the communication mirror, the communications girl seemed to be listening to something. Then, she immediately turned her head and smiled. Sir Commander said, "It's fine." Duque said it's fine. Then it should be fine. Duque had been in control of the alliance for more than 10 years. Whether it was his demigod status or his prestige, they had reached the pinnacle. If he said it was fine, it should be fine. Even though everyone was nervous, even though everyone's palms were sweating, they still chose to believe in Duque and did nothing. There were no suitable targets within range. Firing indiscriminately would be a waste. The Alliance soldiers on the hood quietly waited for the verdict to come. In the eyes of others, a tragedy was about to happen. Suddenly, something that looked like a cloud or mist was torn apart, and a huge green dragon pounced from the left. Among the dragons, there was only one green dragon that had such a majestic and elegant appearance, the Emerald Dragon King Isra. She did not launch a brutal attack. She merely roared at the top of her voice. Serenarian knelt down. The dragon's face, which had been ferocious and violent because of his boss, calmed down at a speed visible to the naked eye. His gaping mouth also closed, as if he was about to enter the deepest sleep. Several green dragons that were not inferior to him swarmed up. Before Serenarian woke up from his dream, he used the most brutal bite of the dragons to tear the Twilight Dragon apart. Ah! Was this a nightmare? If this is a nightmare, let me wake up. At the end of his life, Thanarian could not tell the difference between illusion and reality. He instinctively tried to use the Twilight Domain to absorb the energy around him to repair his body, but Isra was there. A green special domain completely suppressed Serenarian's domain. Just like the difference in strength between demigods, battles between domains were much simpler and more direct. The difference in strength naturally resulted in complete suppression in an instant. The outcome was decided in an instant. One of his green dragons held Serenarian's head in his mouth, ready to bring it back as a trophy. Isra instantly killed the enemy's general, turned around in the air, and even had the time to wave his claws at the officers of the Alliance fleet to show his friendliness. The appearance of this elegant and beautiful Dragon King immediately caused the entire fleet to cheer. The soldiers poked their heads out from behind the cannons, raised their hands high, and waved their arms excitedly. Even the fire elemental creatures led by the fire demon bowed to Isra. The captains of the various warships and the officers in the fortress were also excited to see this scene. Maybe the ancient war 10,000 years ago was like this, where all the races united to fight against evil. I think so. Even Duque, who was sitting in the command center of the fortress, felt like he was in the Return of the Army's war in the game. Isra, I won't let you die this time, Duque muttered softly, but Duque's words were heard by Tyrande. The beautiful high priestess immediately fell into deep thought. As Isra flew at high speed with the last few ancient green dragons and returned to the main battlefield, the battle on Onyxia's side was also over. The Black Dragon Princess took a deep breath and blinded Variona's vision. All the feints were to cover up the sweeping tail of the scorpion-like dragon. This time, Variona, who couldn't dodge in time, was hit in the head. Her entire left skull and left eye collapsed, and her left shoulder was also injured. Normal giant dragons would have died from such injuries, but Variona fully activated the Twilight Domain and even absorbed the frost elements in the air to heal herself. Onyxia followed up with another attack, and the Twilight Dragon finally fell from the sky. Variona fell like a cannonball into the middle of the iceberg on the west side of Dragon's Pine River. The cracked ice spread in all directions, and immediately caused an avalanche. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that a terrifying wave suddenly surged out of Dragon's Pine River. This sudden wave instantly engulfed the heavily injured Variona. She still wanted to struggle, but a huge anchor was thrown out from the wave and strangely hooked onto her neck. In the next second, an irresistible force came from the rising wave. She screamed as she saw several gigantic aquatic monsters that seemed to be grinning sinisterly in the middle of the huge waves. Hee hee. Hee 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 hee. That's right, after dealing with Ratio, Tidewalker Marogri and the others had their eyes on a new prey. Having just obtained new power, they couldn't wait to show their value to their master. The fate of Majordomo Executus had already told them that although Duque needed a Majordomo to take care of his vast territory, he also needed powerful beings who could help him charge and break through enemy lines. At first, these powerful aquatic beings didn't want their queen to rely on Duque. However, as Duque gradually revealed his strength and future, and when they obtained a share of the water elemental realm, the concept of "Master's master is our true master" began to be deeply imprinted in their hearts. When Variona was dragged into the water, Onyxia turned around and flew towards the main battlefield. "Good job, Onyxia." In the soul communication, Duque was not stingy with his praise. Then, "Master, should I train a dragon when I come back? Is this guy addicted to it?" Duque complained in his heart, but he said, "Wait until you have the courage to face your parents." The fierce battle in the northern sky of Dragonsleep Temple was still going on. Other than Kalegos being beaten like a dog by the tail of the larger Deathwing and falling down, the Dragonsleep Coalition army didn't lose any of their main dragons. Although she was stalling for time, Alexstrasza felt that it was unreal and ridiculous. Why did she feel that her betrayed brother was a little weak? Chapter 1860. Indeed. The Wing of Death that appeared in the north of the Long Sleep Temple had the most terrifying body. After integrating with the ancient progenitor Wyrm Galacrin's biological cells, his body size had skyrocketed to more than 500 meters. The core of his body was also 200 meters long and more than 100 meters wide. This was no different from a conjoined skyscraper of 70 to 80 stories flying around in everyone's field of vision. That kind of earth-shattering brute force was not something any mortal creature could resist. This was no longer a matter of health, it was almost impossible to break through his defense. The thick layer of acid that wrapped around his body was simply his second layer of dragon skin. An ordinary Wyrm's dragon breath would at most evaporate into a cloud of acid mist, it could not even touch his body. They had to be even more careful not to choke on the acid mist when they were downwind. It had been confirmed that if a young dragon inhaled a large amount of acid droplets, its respiratory tract would rot and it would die directly. Only dragons of the ancient Wyrm level could hurt the Wing of Death. Unfortunately, it was only superficial injuries that did not affect the muscles and bones. The ancient blue dragon Irigos had boldly wrapped his dragon body with frost elements and sealed a large area of the acid on Nisario's body with frost dragon breath. He then rushed over to break the acid and gave Nisario's body a direct hit with a magic bomb. It had indeed caused a huge wound that was big enough to stuff a small villa. Who knew that the acid that surged from other parts of Nisario's body would almost bury him? The wound that was created was also filled up by the crazily proliferating dragon-like biological tissue in a mere 10 breaths. No. There were even more. On that dragon's body, there were a few dragon legs and dragon claws of the ordinary Wyrm level. It looked very disgusting. "Your Majesty, this will never end." The ancient red dragon Gahairon reminded his queen. "No. As a red dragon, have you forgotten the true meaning of life? The essence of life is the consumption of energy. The recovery of any limb is bound to consume vitality, which is some kind of special energy. Nisario's recovery power is definitely not infinite." Alexstrasza did not say the second half of the sentence. This Nisario seemed a bit retarded. With such a huge body and such vitality and defense, no one would be able to do anything to him in a short period of time. If he didn't care and charged over, forcefully destroying the dragon's slumber shrine, even if the new 5-color guardian dragons gathered here, it would be difficult to stop his destruction. However, Darkwing's single-minded pursuit of Alexstrasza gave her the opportunity to toy with her old rival. A sweep of the dragon's tail would produce a terrifying wind pressure equivalent to the collapse of a 100-story building. Ordinary creatures could only watch helplessly as they died. As a dragon aspect that had been dedicated to protecting the planet for the past 25,000 years and had rich combat experience, Alexstrasza's speed might not be as fast as lightning, but it was still rather fast. She could even use the wind pressure from Nisario's tail to speed up her flight. It looked dangerous, but it was actually as stable as a dog. Basically, she led the ancient Wyrms of the red, blue, and bronze Wyrms to fight Neltharion, while the rest of the Wyrms could only watch from the sidelines. After receiving the news that Crassus's ruby jade sanctum had been attacked, she still had the spare time to send a few ancient WYRMS back with a small number of WYRMS to hold the fort when the Twilight Dragons were pulled away. The real battle was between the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu and the Undead Dragon Queen Sinestra. The living Sinestra couldn't be compared to a real Dragon King. At best, she was just a strong female dragon, strong enough to withstand Nisario's love without dying. Nisario was very wild when he was having sex. The 3 deep scars on Sinestra's dragon chest that looked like ravines were the scars left behind by her temporary partner back then. Neltharion almost killed her, and also caused the deaths of 2 dragons. Later, she turned into a dragon scientist and wanted to develop a new breed of WYRMS to kill Nisario. Unfortunately, after being killed by the Twilight Dragon, she was rescued by Nisario and listened to him again. Perhaps this was the unique sadomasochism of the Black WYRMS. According to history, Sinestra would be quite weak at the start of the battle because she had played the Superman game with Darkwing and nursed the Twilight WYRM whelps. Without half a life, her attack power would be greatly reduced. There was no such problem in this life. It would be more accurate to say that Neltharion was now more like an oversized battery for Sinestra to squander. Onyxia had the famous, deep breath, and her powerful dragon breath naturally came from her mother. Sinestra's, flame breath, was a full-screen attack in the eyes of mortals. Other dragon breaths were cone-shaped, but hers was a torrent of flames. The raging sea of fire, even in the air, was like a terrifying moving wall of fire with the WYRMS as the standard. The ancient WYRMS would howl if they were hit. What was really amazing was her twilight attack skills. A normal WYRM wouldn't be able to play so many tricks, but the Twilight Energy, which was based on Shadow Energy, allowed Sinestra to play with all sorts of tricks. Flame Breath forcefully baked the sand on Nozdormu's body, making it even more dry and vulnerable to cracking. Hundreds of Twilight Shockwaves flew everywhere. Ordinary adult WYRMS would be killed instantly if they came into contact with one. The disgusting thing was that these shockwaves weren't really out of her control. They weakened and dissipated on their own after being fired. These Twilight Energy balls would hover in mid-air according to her will, and connect in 2s and 3s. Between 2 Twilight Energy balls, there would also be Twilight Cutting Rays. If one accidentally touched them, a huge amount of Twilight Energy would surge into one's body. Not to mention the ancient WYRMS, even Nozdormu had a small finger cut off by the Twilight Rays if he wasn't careful. Of course, Nozdormu was more like an illusory spiritual energy projection. His dragon body was just an existence that had gathered a large amount of sand and materialized. As long as they couldn't attack the timeline and pull out his body, destroying his dragon body 10,000 times or 100 million times would be useless. But it didn't look good. A clear beam of Twilight Energy shot out from the huge wings of death and poured into Sinestra's body, allowing her to go all out. After the initial test, hundreds of Twilight Energy bullets poured into Nozdormu's body every second. As a dimensional dragon king that could interfere with time and history, Nozdormu's body was also a fortress. After his power of time and space started to show, Sinestra felt that her movements had become much slower. Not only her speed, but even her thoughts had started to stagnate. Nozdormu's huge sand WYRMS body was like a stimulant, and kept increasing its speed under the effect of haste. Unfortunately, it was more like they couldn't do anything to each other. Chapter 1861. At this moment, as if he had finally woken up, Nisario's entire body shuddered as if he had just peed himself. He suddenly roared. "It's time to destroy Dragon Slumber Temple." Amazing. Of all times, why did he have to think of it when Isera had yet to return and Nozdormu was being held back? If it was the sinister and cunning Black Dragon King of the past, Alexstrasza would definitely not have taken it so lightly. However, Nisario, who had increased in size and strength but was obviously in a frenzied state, made the queen unknowingly numb and careless. "Stop him." Under the Red Dragon Queen's command, dozens of ancient dragons bit the bullet and launched a fierce attack. There were many casualties, but the effect was minimal. They risked their lives to spit dragon's breath on Nisario's mountainous body. Those with superb flying skills and good luck were able to complete the dragon race's unique bombing in an extremely thrilling manner, and then quickly climb up to avoid Nisario's counterattack. The unlucky ones, such as the ancient blue dragons Cadrigos and Borregos, were slapped to death on the spot. Or, if he was not careful, he would be swallowed by the limbs of the wings of death, just like Karastad's. The moment he was eaten, Alexstrasza felt that Nisario's aura had increased slightly. Titan! What kind of monster is that? The queen shouted with a hint of sorrow. A total of 5 ancient dragons lost their lives in an instant because of her command. This loss even surpassed the ancient war with the devils 10,000 years ago. At least in the ancient war, the lives of ancient dragons were not so worthless. Without a Void Lord, ordinary devils could not take down the heads of ancient dragons. These were 5 primordial dragons that had made a name for themselves. Now that the dragon clan was on the decline, any ancient giant dragon was in existence that guarded a region. One had to know that even the most prosperous red dragons in Dragon Ding only had more than 30 ancient dragons. The blue dragon race, which was suffering, only had more than 10. Alexstrasza's dragon heart was about to die from the pain of losing 5 ancient dragons at once. She would probably be sad for a long time after this battle. After absorbing the 3 ancient WIRMs, Neltharion's dragon body had obviously expanded a little. He laughed wildly with abandon, and just like that, he rolled into the magical protection array area of the dragon's sleep shrine, almost like a meatball. The dragon's sleeping temple's magical defense was undoubtedly the best, but the strongest fortresses were often breached from the inside. As the designated guardians of the Titans, the dragon aspects had the right to use the dragon's sleep temple, but they were not the creators of the dragon's sleep temple. After Nisario's betrayal, the other 4 dragon kings tried their best to modify the defense system of the dragon's slumber shrine, but this effort was more like a temporary solution. It couldn't be helped. The wise Titan had thought of many things and many situations, but he had never thought that the guardians and dragon aspects, who had been instilled with the concept of absolute loyalty, would actually be brainwashed into rebelling. This has led to many tragedies. For example, Neltharion and the Long Sleep Shrine. Like when Lorcan betrayed Odowl. The only problem was that the Titans were not allowed to fly directly to the highest level of the dragon's slumber shrine in order to maintain the respect of the dragon race. Before getting close to the dragon's slumber shrine, they could only fly to the same height as the lower level, which forced the oversized wings of death to run on the ground. Even so, Neltharion, who was like an inflated balloon, was rampaging through the dragon's slumber shrine, as if he had entered a realm without dragons. Only a few magical defense measures really worked and launched attacks against him. Most of the protective facilities were silent, and several spatial barriers even opened on their own after sensing Neltharion's soul. It was not that there were no brave Dragonians or half-Dragonians who stepped forward in an attempt to stop him, but unfortunately, it was more like sending themselves to their deaths. With a stomp, the constantly proliferating dragon limbs pulled these brave people into Neltharion's body, and forcibly swallowed them into a part of the wings of death. Alexstrasza tried to harass him from behind, but it was not very effective. Her flame of purification could not hurt Neltharion's foundation. She had tried, and at most, she could hurt the biological tissues 20 meters below the surface of his body. Any deeper and she was powerless. Sin. It's all my sin. The Red Dragon Queen, who had always been brave and determined, was almost crying. At this moment, Duque's message came. Actually, I think you can trust me a little more. I'm the guardian of Azeroth, after all. Although it was not decided by the Titans. Duque. You have a way. Yes. As long as you no longer regard dealing with Neltharion as an internal affair of the Dragon's Slumber Shrine, and allow me to bring powerhouses in. Duque's voice was sonorous and resolute. All right. At this point, they had already lost all face. Were they going to watch the crystallization of the Pentashade dragons, the Dragon's Slumber Shrine that had been passed down for 25,000 years, be destroyed by a traitor? An entry telekinesis message was sent over. Almost at the same time, four large portals that were 15 stories high suddenly opened in front of Neltharion. Four burly giants stepped out from inside. Ah! It's them. Why didn't I think of it? Alexstrasza was also confused by her concern. Compared to Duque, it was more justifiable for Archivon's four guardians to enter the dragon's slumber shrine. After all, they were all titans. Although the four of them were very strong, could they deal with Neltharion, who was so huge? The four great guardians were 10 stories tall. To mortals, they were definitely huge beings. Tragically, size was relative. Compared to Neltharion, whose torso was 200 meters long and was basically a moving mountain, a 30-meter-tall body was really not enough. They were just a few miserable dwarves. Right at this time, Duke's figure suddenly appeared in a flash. He stood on the shoulder of Rock Guardian Archivon. A second later, there were 3 more existences that exuded an extremely powerful aura. On the shoulder of Storm Guardian Emeron was Sylvanas. On the shoulder of Flame Guardian Coralon was Kale, that's. On the shoulder of Frost Guardian Turawan was Vashj. Emeron. Requesting the advent of the Storm Guardian shouted and raised his arms high. Suddenly, 2 openings that looked like holes appeared in his palms. It was not that there were holes in his palms, but that he had completely opened the interface of his elemental circuit. Sylvanas. In the name of the Master of the Wind God Throne, I agree to your request. Queen Sylvanas's brilliant blonde hair suddenly rose high in the wind, like a golden peacock proudly spreading its tail. The atmosphere suddenly trembled violently, and the shadow of the Wind God Throne appeared in the void above the dragon's slumber shrine. A powerful tornado that was enough to wrap the entire dragon's slumber shrine rolled up, but in just 3 seconds, all the wind elements, under the guidance of Queen Sylvanas, poured into Emeron's body. Chapter 1862. Just like back then, Magni could absorb earth elements to expand his body to the size of Alcavon. Now, the half-elemental, half-living Amaran was doing the same thing. If it was in the past, there wouldn't have been so much pure and highly concentrated wind elements to support his enlarged body. But after Queen Sylvanas grasped the wind elemental realm, everything was different. Amaran's body expanded like an inflated balloon. In less than 3 seconds, he had become a 100-meter-tall giant, at least 3 times larger than his original size. If he was a human, he would definitely feel uncomfortable because of the changes in his body structure. The Watcher himself was not a living being in the standard sense. Not only his body, even the clothes and equipment on his body were mostly made of elements. And as a half-elemental life form, there was no discomfort after becoming bigger, as long as the body proportion was normal. Oh. Amaran let out a wild and heroic roar. Not only him, but the 2 Watchers, Coralon and Turawan, were also enjoying the same treatment. The massive injection of fire and frost elements made them also become giants of Imaran's level. A moment ago, in front of Nesario, who had become incomparably huge after absorbing Galakrin's remains, the 3 giants were just dwarfs. 10 seconds later, they had become behemoths strong enough to threaten Nesario. Even though the main trunk of the wings was more than 200 meters long, the dragon race had long tails and necks. Even if the necks were shorter because of Galakron's genes, the main trunk of the wings was still more than 120 meters long. Both sides had become terrifying existences of the same weight class. The elemental masters who were originally standing on the 3 quickly left because they were not the main characters next. Come on. The 3 giants let out a provocative roar in unison. Roar, the wings roared in response. It swatted at Imaran's head, but the Storm Watcher showed agility that was not commensurate with his size. He actually did a front somersault, dodged the attack, and stepped on Nesario's left wing. The slightly slow Turawan was caught by the right claw of the wings, and the biological corrosion that the 4-color dragons feared hit a wall on Turawan's body. Those dragon limbs that had grown out were immediately frozen when they touched Turawan's body. The freezing air at absolute zero instantly stopped the reproduction of their cells. The most important component of a cell was water. When water turned into ice and its volume increased, it would break the cell wall and membrane, causing the cell to die. The others only saw that the growing limbs on Darkwing's body seemed to have met their nemesis. They actually struggled to retreat, as if they didn't want the plague to spread to their bodies. It was a bit too late. Large amounts of limbs were completely frozen and then disintegrated into beautiful ice crystal fragments. The real main attacker was the Flame Warden, Kalaran. He took huge steps that shook the world and rushed to the side of Wings, giving Wings a hard shoulder bump. Bang! Roar! Not only did Coralon knock the black dragon over, but the raging fire elements on its body also evaporated a large amount of acid on the dragon's body. Deathwing let out a thunderous cry of pain. This was the first time he had been knocked over since the start of the battle. He lay on his side on the ground with his 4 limbs in the air. As a former dragon aspect of the combat faction, Wing was not that easy to kill. When the other 2 wardens wanted to go up and take advantage of the situation, he raised his limbs and kicked them away. Arcavon, the only warden who did not go up, looked a little lonely. It couldn't be helped. His 3 good brothers had a place to play, and he could only stay here and watch the show. Duque joked, "Sorry. I haven't controlled the Deep Rock continent yet." Arcavon perked up. "It's okay. I believe it's only a matter of time." At this time, Alexstrasza landed next to Arcavon. "Duque. This is indeed a good idea, but I don't think the 3 of them can take down the traitor, Nesario." The queen gritted her teeth a little. Deathwing was too tanky. As long as his body's ability to reproduce was greater than the damage he suffered, he would truly be immortal. There were only 2 solutions: either interrupt his growth, or inflict damage that exceeded his recovery ability. The queen focused all her attention on Duque. In terms of attack power, perhaps even Moon Goddess Elun's Starfall could not compare to Duque, who controlled the 2 elemental realms of water and fire. Duque shook his head. "It's not the time yet." Alexstrasza thought that Duque wanted to accumulate power for the final blow, so she did not pay much attention. This was not what Duque was really concerned about. Beep beep beep. On Duque's retina, the system scanned a lot of data. There was too much abnormal data. He had basically confirmed a fact that overlapped with history. Duque did not do anything. He just snapped his fingers. Snap! A crisp sound rang out. In response to the sound, several wardens stepped out of the huge teleportation doors that had been opened. Traitor! Dai, Torim, who had the most burly body, was the first to swing his hammer. A thick thunderbolt that seemed to be able to split the entire dragon's slumber temple in half suddenly flashed out of the void. It was filled with the most violent power of thunder in the world. The purple thunderbolt landed directly on Deathwing's head. Ah! On the huge dragon's head, all the multiplying dragon-like limbs turned into charcoal and instantly exploded. The heavy bombardment forced Deathwing to lower his proud head. It looked like he had placed his neck on the execution platform. "Tie up that traitor." Life Guardian Freya raised her arms high. Several green vines with a diameter of more than 10 meters broke out of the frozen ground in front of the dragon's slumber temple and tightly wrapped around the struggling dragon's neck. The 3rd warden, Hodier, appeared. He raised his hands high, and a frost axe that was far larger than his body size took shape in his hands. The ratio between his body and the frost axe was quite exaggerated. It looked like a mouse lifting an elephant. With a thunderous roar, the huge single-edged ice axe had a real master. Frost Guardian Turawan took the terrifying ice axe that Hodier had created. It seemed to be able to split the sky and earth. The axe that symbolized judgment finally fell. Sizzle, it was a strange sound that did not match the scene. The scene seemed to be frozen. Then, like a comic strip, everyone saw that after Nesario's huge snake neck was cut off, he began to roll and twitch in pain on the ground like an earthworm that had been roasted by fire. His dragon head even bit the dragon skeletons that were scattered on the ice field. The sound of bones breaking made one's scalp tingle. Chapter 1863. What the hell? A dragon that had its neck cut off could still struggle like a snake and bite everywhere? The only fortunate thing was that Nesario's mountain-like body had stopped. The strange thing was that there was a large layer of acid that wrapped around his horrifying body that was constantly proliferating. Now, it seemed to have lost control of its brain, and its entire body began to expand. Where there was only one dragon claw a moment ago, there might be a few more legs in the next second. Purify these damn things. The Red Dragon Queen gave the order, and the sleeping dragon coalition army immediately flew over. The dragons spat out a surprise attack with all their might, using their pure elements to destroy these constantly proliferating things. Fortunately, the flame of purification was still relatively effective against these biological tissues that had lost their foundation and no longer had the assistance of twilight energy to help them proliferate. Amidst the howls that sounded like countless murdered dragons, the proliferation finally began to slow down. One could see that the swollen skeletal body had finally become a little shriveled. This was the work of the underlings. Several guards and guardians were still busy dealing with the dying dragon of death, Nesario, who was still able to move even though he only had his neck and head left. Here. Hodir materialized another spear made of ice. This 100-meter-long ice spear was more than 3 times Hodir's height, and it was just right for the enlarged Turawan to use. Amalran cooperated with Koralran to use a flaming storm to interfere with Nesario's line of sight, giving Turawan a chance to launch a sneak attack. The huge Frost Guardian leaped high, pointed its spear downwards, and pierced Nesario's neck a few meters below the dragon's head. It penetrated the dragon's neck, and then pierced deep into the ice field. It was nailed. Nesario still wanted to make a countercharge. Koralran and Amalran did not give him a chance. The two giants took heavy and rapid steps as if they were wrestling, firmly suppressing Deathwing's attempt to open its mouth. Without its limbs, Deathwing was like a snake. If even its weak spot was hit, and even its mouth was sealed, then its defeat was sealed. No, it should be said that it was destined when its neck was chopped off. Ha! Sir Torim first used Thor's X-hammer to hit Deathwing's head with the momentum of whack-a-mole. Immediately after, Alexstrasza and Isera, who had rushed back, unleashed the twin dragons emerge from the sea. They pounced on Neltharion and directly blew up his head. Bang! It was a huge explosion. First, Nesario's head felt strangely liquefied. Then, the protruding dragon limbs rapidly petrified in less than half a second. They turned from black to a withered grayish-white, and finally, like plaster that had been crushed, they turned into fine, hard lumps and powder. This kind of killing made every Titan powerhouse who had participated in this battle feel a little surreal. Have we killed Nesario? Freya, the guardian of life, was a little confused. Something doesn't feel right. The rock guardian Alcaphon stroked his large beard. Isera, the authoritative expert on the soul and will, said, "That's not right. I did not feel Neltharion's soul dissipate. If this really is his true body, there's no way I wouldn't be able to sense his violent and tyrannical soul fluctuations." Everyone's expression turned ugly. The dragon's sleep shrine had made such a huge sacrifice, and now they were saying that the one they killed was not Nesario's main body. The question was, where was Nesario's main body? Alexstrasza turned her head and looked at Duque. Duque sighed, knowing that he had to express his opinion. "I've felt that something was wrong since just now. I'm very sensitive to evil and soul fluctuations. Just like when I discovered that Sargeras possessed Medivh, I also discovered that Nesario had transformed into Lord Presto. I'm sure that the Nesario we just killed could only be considered a clone." What? All the powerhouses were shocked. Duque added, "The most powerful clone." Even so, everyone still didn't look good. Duque sighed. "Well, this Nesario is a fake, but at least the Sinestra outside is the real one. Let's get rid of her first." A group of aggressive guardians, watchmen, and dragon aspects swarmed forward. The dragon mother, who was originally quite difficult to deal with, screamed and screamed. It was beyond Duque's expectations, or rather, the relationship between the Black Dragon King and his family was so indifferent. Your mother is dead, Duque said to Onyxia. But she's already died once, and this is the second time. Even if I want to mourn the death of my loved ones like humans, why should I mourn twice? The Black Dragon Princess's words made so much sense that Duque was speechless. The results of the battle were supposed to be quite glorious. They had gotten rid of Neserio's most powerful clone, Sinestra, the two Twilight Dragon leaders, and thousands of Twilight WIRMs. Unfortunately, Twilight Dragons could be bred repeatedly, and Alexstrasza had even received the latest news from Krasis. Those damn Twilight believers could pollute the dragon eggs with Twilight magic, causing normal four-color dragon eggs to hatch into Twilight Dragon whelps. Krasis had no choice but to join forces with other ancient dragons to kill those Twilight Dragon whelps and destroy those dragon eggs. The dragons of the various races were distressed and worried at the same time. If Neserio's main body was hiding in an unknown corner and relying on a clone and a bunch of Twilight Dragon cannon fodder, he could threaten a base like the Dragon Sleep Temple every time. How could they fight this battle? Isera approached Duque at this time. She had transformed into an elf. Duque blinked. Sure enough, Isera was much more pleasing to the eye when she turned into an elf. Isera said, Duque, according to your speculation, where will Neserio's main body be? Duque opened his mouth. He wanted to spoil it, but bitterly found that he couldn't. Originally, the first time in history that the Wing of Death besieged the Dragon Sleep Temple, it was the main body who personally led the Twilight Dragon army. Its biggest feature was that its body was covered with superhard source armor. The reason why Neserio was called Iron Chin by the players was because he wore a huge source metal chin under his chin. Ordinary attacks of the dragons could not penetrate the incomparably hard source armor at all. Without seeing the source armor, Duque's first thought was that this exaggerated version of Neserio was a fake. Now it seemed that this was indeed the case. Duque wanted to say something but stopped. Alexstrasza thought that Duque was angry. She also flew over and transformed into her human form. The red-haired mature lady from back then had returned. I know. I was too selfish to think that I could rely on the power of the Dragon Sleep Temple to deal with the traitor. It's my fault, please forgive me, okay? I owe you a big favor. Now, Neltharion had become a Terminator. I can't let a guy who has the ability to destroy the world run around. Just say what you've speculated. Chapter 1864. The red-haired big sister put her hands on Duque's shoulders and shook Duque without any hesitation. Unknowingly, Duque looked at the other party's huge dragon peaks swaying non-stop, a little, cough cough. Duque pretended to speak seriously, and the red-haired big sister let him off for the time being. I'm guessing that Zoth used evil magic to completely strengthen Neserio's soul. His original body may be very similar to Nozdormu, and has already transcended the cycle of life. Simple death can no longer stop the madness of Deathwing. Only by completely destroying his origin can he truly be killed. As soon as Duque's voice fell, the whole place was dead silent. How could they fight this? The original body hid in the origin of the world or the crevice of space and time, and then continuously released the proliferating splits to cause trouble. Even the splits were so strong, if he were to wreak havoc in the world, no one dared to imagine what would happen. Well, the worst-case scenario is that Deathwing has more than one doppelganger. Perhaps their strength and vitality are not as strong as this one, but it's still very troublesome. Duque's words were practically a prophecy. On the second day, almost all the main cities in Azeroth received reports of being attacked by Deathwing. Shameless dragon. Destroying heaven and earth. Although they did not want to admit it, even if Deathwing was divided into dozens of doppelgangers, each doppelganger was still equivalent to an ancient dragon and could easily destroy a city. Eastern Kingdom continent, from the northernmost Silvermoon City all the way to the south, including the main cities of Lordaeron, Gilneas, South Sea City, Rapids Fort, Iron Furnace Fort, Stormwind City, New Kurtira City, and other cities. Almost every city with a population of more than 10,000 had a Deathwing doppelganger. Alliance cities like Kalimdor, Darnassus, Exodar, and Theramore could not escape, but even Ashenvale's Astrana and the distant Feathermoon Fortress on the southwest island of the mainland were attacked. Alliance cities were certainly Nesario's main targets, but the tribes and the various races that had left the tribes could not escape either. Winter Spring's New Undercity, the Goblins' Rusty Water City, the Taurens' Thunder Cliff, the Trolls' Echo Archipelago's Dark Spear Island, the Orcs' Orgrimmar, and other main cities, plus the Crossroads, as well as the Orcs' Warsong labor camp that broke into Ashenvale to prepare to cut down trees. The flames that represented death were burning. The huge city walls crumbled under his claws. None of the birds were a match for him. Even the bravest warrior would be powerless in front of these flying monsters. The Alliance was still okay. This was because every Alliance city had at least one protector or overseer standing guard. The weave that was spread across every major city of the Alliance used tens of thousands of mage eyes to scan the entire territory of the Alliance. Duque wasn't the only one who was monitoring the situation with the system. Khadgar also led every mage who had transformed into a weave spirit to help. More effectively, Kale, that's led tens of thousands of Dalajan wizards and apprentices in a one-on-one manner, using the magic net to set up surveillance eyes all over the world. As long as any one of Deathwing's clones entered the visual range of a certain mage eye, the Dragon Slumber Shrine, Duque, the Alliance's demigods, and the experts of the elemental system would form an extermination team and arrive at the scene within a minute. But the Alliance territory was too big, and there were always places that couldn't be monitored. 100,000 watchers seemed like a lot, but in reality, it was still a drop in the bucket when it was spread over 10 million square kilometers. Only the populated areas could respond in time. Moreover, individual twilight dragons were not easy to deal with. Anyway, these days, the Alliance was so busy that they almost collapsed. The Alliance was like this, and the tribes were even more desperate. If Orgrimmar had the help of King Gruul, there was no danger for the time being. The other territories were basically doomed. Thunder Cliff was burned to the ground, and the wooden buildings with a long history were all burned. Kane's son, the new Tauren chief, Ben, led the Taurens to hide in the caves of the mountain rocks, escaping from the devastation of Deathwing's clones. Dark Spear Island was similar, and the Trolls' territory was completely destroyed. Wajin had to take his people to hide in the potholes. The new Undercity had an advantage because the city itself was built underground. Fortunately, Deathwing's clones did not have the habit of fighting on land, so the Forgotten basically passed this time without any injuries. The most miserable was the Rusty Water conglomerate, and the Rusty Water city of a certain prince of trade was destroyed. Deathwing's indiscriminate attack made him the object of collective curses of all the intelligent races in the world within a few days. Not to mention the tribes or the former tribes that were abused like dogs, the Alliance couldn't bear it either. Even if there were food reserves, there would always be a day when they ran out. The devastation of Deathwing's clones caused production and construction to completely come to a standstill. What was even more disgusting was that the acid breath, flame dragon breath, or the dragon limbs that could survive and grow for a considerable period of time brought by Deathwing's clones had become a huge problem. Looking at the report, sometimes Duque even thought that he had traveled to the Silent Hill world and played a game of death with those deformed monsters. Finally, on the 7th day after the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, Isra found Duque, who was waiting in Karazhan. Duque. I know you have a way. I can sense it, why don't you say it? Duque spat in his heart, damn. A guy with telepathy is a blockhead. In the face of Isra's pleading attitude, Duque really couldn't be tough. Anyway, if there were no accidents, he still had to go with the general trend. He could only sigh and say a modified version of the idea. I did think of an idea, but it's a pity that the idea is too crazy. And whether it succeeds or not, the consequences will be very serious. What consequences? Isra asked. She held Duque's hands with both of them, not allowing Duque to back down. Duque said word by word, the worst consequence is that all the existing dragon aspects lose the power given by the Titans and completely become mortal dragons. Isra was very smart, and she guessed immediately. Are you talking about the soul of the dragon? Yes. But the thing that degenerated into the soul of the demon, hasn't it already been destroyed by us? After Duque rescued Alexstrasza from the grim battle fortress, in order to avoid trouble, the queen found a way to let Duque destroy the parts of the other 4 dragons, leaving only the black dragon part to cause trouble for Duque. Because of this, Duque was able to tame Onyxia. Duque reminded Isera. I'm talking about the soul of the dragon, from the ancient war 10,000 years ago. Isera immediately gasped. She knew what Duque was talking about. If Nozdorma used his full strength, he could indeed send all the dragon aspects back to 10,000 years ago. But a new problem arose. No. Onyxia's power isn't enough to activate the soul of the dragon. She's lacking a little. Chapter 1865. Onyxia was known as a dragon aspect, and her foundation was also the power of the earth. Everyone knew that she was just there to make up the numbers. If this world could give a dragon a good or evil rating, she would probably have a -100 rating. Of course, it could have been -1000. After being trained by Duque for so long, her evil rating must have decreased a lot. She wouldn't do anything that he didn't want her to do, and she wouldn't do anything rash. She was like a well-behaved child. However, everyone knew that underneath the rules, there was perhaps evil hidden in the deepest part of one's heart. Or perhaps she had really changed after taming so many dragons. No matter what, she had nothing to do with kindness. At most, she was a neutral person. If Duke did not give her a kick or an order, she would never take the initiative to do any good deeds, not to mention protecting the world as her own responsibility. The reason why the dragon aspects had the word protect was because they really respected this responsibility and were willing to treat it as their duty. Also, because of the harmony between the soul and the responsibility, they could draw power that surpassed the mortal world from the mysterious rules left behind by the Titans. In terms of fighting ability, she was definitely 100 times better than that useless dragon king Kalegos. That guy's combat ability was probably one of the lowest among the ancient dragons. When it came to activating the dragon's soul, it was the other way around. Because she had no sense of responsibility and self-awareness, and didn't even have an ancient black dragon younger brother or sister, Onyxia really couldn't activate the dragon's soul. If she was missing one of these 4, it would be very dangerous. Isera's words made Duque narrow his eyes. Is she lacking a little, or not at all? Isera also sighed. Sigh, she's very talented. If she puts her heart and soul into it, there's a chance she can reach 85% of the level of us 3 first-generation dragon aspects. But the problem of willpower. We've already done tests. Kalegos can reach 90% of the 3 of us if he puts his heart and soul into it, but Onyxia can only reach 50% at most. That wasn't even enough to pass. Duque knew that Isera had already given him face. In actual combat, everything had to be discounted. Usually 60%, but in actual combat, there might only be 40% or 50% left. How much water a bucket can hold will always depend on the shortest board. If he really hoped that Onyxia could perform steadily, then he would be screwed. What's more, she was not a fool who would dare to kill her father. Onyxia was still quite afraid of her father. The resistance in Stormwind City had certainly strengthened her confidence, but how much confidence did she have? If she really wanted to attack Nesario, something might go wrong. Facing Isera's burning gaze, Duque sighed. I'm going to do some mental work on Onyxia. But I can only increase the probability to 70%. Then. Isera really wanted to say, even 70% is not enough, but she didn't say it in the end. The thoughts of an adult intelligent creature were the hardest to change. Duque boasted that he had improved it to 70%, which was already quite impressive. When will the results be out? Isera asked. Give me one night. Duque's words had a double meaning. For once, Isera's face, which was already pale and rosy, seemed to have turned a shade redder. Then I'll have to trouble you, Duque. I'll come back tomorrow morning. Isera did not put on any airs. Instead, he bowed deeply to Duque. The dragon's peak flashed a white light under the effect of gravity, almost blinding Duque's eyes. Duque quickly looked away. After Isra left, Duque called Onyxia. Yo, my master, is there something you need from me? Countess Katrana, the Black Dragon Princess, wore a red mid-dress, and everything below the knees was covered by a black veil. After spending so much time together, she could see through Duque's thoughts at a glance. Oh. Are you going to tame a dragon? Duque's gaze was in order, and the human-shaped dragon just lay down meekly. When the dragon taming whip entered the dragon's cave as usual, the black dragon let out a long dragon roar. The dragon taming whip easily crushed the dragon's pride. Unknowingly, Onyxia had become addicted to the dragon taming ceremony. In the ceremony, she could completely let go of her schemes and distracting thoughts, and enjoy the strange feeling of being conquered to her heart's content. After a long while, the ceremony ended, although the dragon taming whip was still deeply embedded. Onyxia, tell me, what do you think of the world of Azeroth? Onyxia was a little confused, but she still answered, I don't really care. I'll just follow you from now on. Duque's heart lit up. He knew that this was the crux of the problem. She had no feelings for Azeroth at all. In her eyes, this planet was no different from a pebble beside a nest. There was no special meaning to it, so naturally, she did not care about protecting it. Duque knew that he had no choice but to use some strong medicine. He faced the sky at a 45-degree angle, and an invisible tear fell from his crocodile-like eyes. He lamented in his heart, Azeroth. Azeroth. In order to save you, I lost all my integrity. Remember to repay me, let me ascend to godhood. A gust of wind blew through the void, and it seemed to come from the will of Azeroth. Shut up. Duque was bewitched, and he thought that the will of the planet had agreed. Ah. You agreed, how nice of you. Duque hugged the black dragon tenderly. Hey, Onyxia, if I say that I hope that Azeroth can become the home planet of a special draken, do you think you'll change your mind? Onyxia shuddered. She couldn't believe her ears. Her current position might seem very secure, but a mount was still a mount. Maybe one day, a three-headed female golden dragon would suddenly spawn, and she would lose her status as a mount. Being a mount was really tough. Riding day and night. There was even the possibility of being abandoned. Duque's words had undoubtedly raised her to a higher level. She also knew that her position in Duque's heart was definitely not as high as the first 7. Then she should at least be on the same level as that blue-skinned hoof, right? Master, are you serious? Onyxia's eyes lit up when she suddenly had a direction to look forward to. You're still calling me master? Duque smirked. Yo, Duque, I suddenly realized that I'm becoming more and more infatuated with you. With that, Onyxia did not even need to turn over, and her dragon body directly shook. The next day, Isra visited again and personally conducted the guardian test on Onyxia. This is a miracle. Isra looked at the special guardian value measuring system, completely dumbfounded. He did not expect that after one night, Onyxia would actually become even more compatible with it. 80%. This number was simply shocking. Hee. Azeroth is where my mother's nest is. I definitely won't let it be destroyed so easily. The Black Dragon Princess' face was glowing with energy. Chapter 1866. Logically speaking, with 80% of the Guardian's value, a 20% discount should be enough. After informing Alexstrasza, she was pleasantly surprised. In the Wyrmrest Shrine, there was a summit attended by the 5 great dragon aspects, the Guardians, several wilderness demigods, and several alliance leaders led by Duque. Everyone had come to a general agreement on the plan to seize the giant dragon soul. Given that Nesario's avatars were still wreaking havoc all over the world, it was impossible for the Justice Camp to go all out. Considering the special nature of the battle, in principle, the Guardians and Watchers would not participate. All the gods of the wilderness would stay behind to guard the Azeroth at this time. Because the water and fire elemental realms from 10,000 years ago were still in the hands of Neptulin and Ragnaros, Kael, That's and Vasht's abilities were limited. The two of them and their subordinates also stayed behind. Moreover, Kale, that's had already started to break through to the demigod realm, so it was even more impossible for him to leave. In the end, it was decided that the 5 dragon aspects and the 2 demigods, Duque and Sylvanas, would form an allied force to travel through time and space to attack Neltharion's main body. However, at the end of the meeting, Duque mentioned, "I want to buy insurance for the Earth Guardian." Oh. Alexstrasza perked up. They had run through this plan countless times. The 3 veteran dragon aspects would definitely be fine. Something would happen to either Kalegos or Onyxia. There was actually a substitute for Kalegos, or even a superior substitute. He was naturally Duque. Duque, who was also proficient in arcane magic and was even more proficient in Titan runes than Kalegos was. He had grasped the highest secrets of magic on this planet, so he could easily get rid of Kalegos and work alone. Just because the giant dragon soul seemed to be more stable if it was played by the dragons. But everyone was worried about Onyxia. Even if her will to protect suddenly increased by 30%. I don't think the Alliance has any Earth-type experts, right? Didn't Magni Bronzebeard's soul not return yet? Nozdormu asked. Duque smiled mysteriously. It's not that easy to become a demigod of the Earth element. The thick and solid Earth needed a calm heart and a long time to resonate with it. Magni would definitely not make it in time. I mean the other person. Duque's words surprised not only the dragons, but also the leaders of the Alliance. Who was Duque referring to? Duque did not reveal the mystery. Instead, he revealed a mysterious smile. If I'm not wrong, as long as he and Onyxia stand in front of the dragon soul, the success rate of the Earth element will be 100%. Duque's words made everyone's curiosity explode. At this moment, there were traces of destruction everywhere on the land of the Echo Islands. A beast man stepped onto this piece of land that had been scorched by the flames of destruction. At his feet were completely charred wood and a black troll corpse. The regenerative abilities that the trolls were so proud of were laughable in the face of this absolute destructive power. Suddenly, a troll silently appeared behind the tall and sturdy beast man. You're too late. The giant troll seemed to have a hunchback. His body was bent into a capital C. It was not known if his body was naturally like this, or if his shoulders were crushed by the heavy burden of his compatriots. The beast man suddenly turned back. He clenched his fists. His sharp nails dug into his palms, causing blood to come out. No. It's not too late. The giant troll shook his head. His wise eyes showed pain, sorrow, and extreme anger. No. It's too late. If you return to the tribe. Enough. Thrall. It's too late. The one sitting in the position of the great chief is that crazy man with a bad brain. You're the one who brought him up. Now he's treating all non-orc races as cannon fodder. First Cain. If I don't leave, the next one will be me and the dark spear troll. Wajin waved his arms in agitation. What else can you do? The great chief of the former tribe, Sal. Wajin was furious. His words also deeply provoked Thrall. That's right, Thrall had returned with not much results. The moment he returned, he discovered the great changes in the tribe. He didn't want to believe this was a fact, so he personally rushed to the Echo Islands where the Dark Spear Troll was. Then, he witnessed this terrifying scene. He was sure that almost all the settlements of the Horde or the former Horde, including Orgrimmar, had suffered heavy damage. The only difference was the degree of damage and the number of lives lost. Faced with the responsibility of his old friend and partner of many years, Thrall was speechless. I'm trying to appease the anger of the elements, Wajin laughed when he heard this, but it was a sneer. Appease? Compared to communication, the Alliance's Duke Marcus seems to have a better way. My shaman told me that he and his woman have conquered the 3 major elemental realms of water, fire, and wind. Even Ragnaros and Al-Akir have been killed. Now, except for the elemental creatures native to Azeroth, no one will respond to our shaman's call. As if he didn't vent his anger, Wajin roared. Damn it! This is equivalent to giving up on the tribe, causing the tribe to fall into the greatest chaos. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, and nothing has been achieved. Instead of this, you should have encouraged the radicals to find that guy and you, Makara. Oh. That won't do. You are strong, but it is impossible for you to fight against Gurus without getting injured. Once you are injured, you will be poisoned to death. Ha! Our old friend Varrock Salufar, in the fair and just, Makara, acquiesced to that guy's use of highly toxic weapons. Thrall fell into a long silence. The cruel reality slapped Sal's face left and right. He knew very well that Wajin loved the tribe as much as he did. The new tribe was built by him and Wajin, who joined first, and then there were the Tauren, the Forsaken, and the Goblins. The so-called love is deep, the hatred is deep. Wajin lost his composure and cursed angrily because of his pain and despair for the tribe. After a long time, Wajin choked out a sentence, "Will you come back?" Thrall said bitterly, "I can't think about other things until this catastrophe is over." What is more important than the tribe? Thrall closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his eyes were full of pain. Whether it is the tribe or the orcs, we have not shown our value in this battle against evil for a long time. If I don't do something, once there is a window of time in Azeroth where there is no common enemy, I bet that the Alliance will definitely attack the tribe. At that time, it is likely that the orcs, trolls, Tauren, goblins, and the Forsaken will all be erased from this planet. Wajin was shocked. Thrall's last words were, "Duque came to me and asked me to be his backup." Chapter 1867. Woken was completely speechless. Everyone, because of their growth environment, growth experience, clan status and many other factors, would have their own limitations. Woken was very smart, otherwise he would not have become Sal's main think tank. He also had his limitations. In the end, he was just a chief of a troll clan that stood out from the many original troll clans. The trolls had lived a hard life in the past 25,000 years. From the world's largest race in the distant past, with two great empires across the entire ancient Kalimdor continent, they had become small clans in a corner. Of course, he could ignore the other troll clans, but what really alerted him was what the Alliance had done. The Alliance was not a peaceful organization. They had completely destroyed Zul Aman, located in the southeast of the Long Song Forest, and Zul Gurub, located in the east of Stranglethorn Vale. This corresponded to the two most glorious empires in the history of the Trolls, the Amani Empire and the Gurubashi Empire. Not only that, but the Rotten Moss clan in the Eastern Plague Lands was also slaughtered by the Alliance. Although the Alliance had absolutely legitimate reasons for doing so, because these clans were behind the Alliance when the world encountered a major crisis, this could not hide the Alliance's decisiveness and ruthlessness. Once again, it proved that as long as the line of justice was crossed in the hearts of the Alliance would mercilessly destroy it. Times had changed. In the past, in the era of cold weapons, the trolls could still fight against magic with their numbers. Now, whether it was the Alliance's terrible flying fleet and other hot weapons, or the highly developed magic network civilization, they were not something that mortal creatures could resist with their bodies alone. As soon as Sal reminded him, Woken immediately realized that the tribe and the several races that had joined the tribe were in a very dangerous situation. Woken was discouraged. Backstop. Backstop for what? Sal smiled bitterly. The Alliance and the Dragon Guardian of the Sleeping Dragon Temple made a plan to deal with the Terminator, Neltharion, and I was needed as a backup. Do you know? Old friend, now the tribe, or the orcs and other races need a righteous title. Only by obtaining this title, no matter how bad the tribe is in the future, will the orcs and other races not be defined as evil races. This was a fight for a gold medal. Woken frowned. What about the tribe? Will you come back? When Woken asked the question, for a moment, Sal almost blurted out, I'll be back. But the opposition of the Nagrand orcs, the difficulties from his compatriots. All sorts of bitterness from the past surged into Thrall's heart. Sal suddenly felt a little lonely when he thought about how he had been forced to abdicate after making outstanding contributions to the tribe for more than 10 years. Moreover, the noble and great cause of wanting to do something for the world of Azeroth was even more attractive to Sal. Sal finally replied, "I'll think about it seriously. But only after this world has escaped from the crisis of extinction." It wasn't the answer Woken wanted to hear the most, but it was better than nothing. Wajin turned around and left. Before he left, he waved his hand. "Well, before that day comes, the Darkspear troll will endure." The noble leader of the trolls seemed to hunch a little more. Sal let out a long sigh. This time, he wanted to persuade Wajin to lead the Darkspear trolls and temporarily return to the tribe. Unfortunately, neither he nor Woking could convince the other party. Seeing destruction and desolation, Sal felt a sense of desolation. Leaving the Echo Islands and coming to the land he named Duroder, Sal finally took out a small crystal shining with arcane brilliance from his pocket and pinched it. "Duque, I'm ready." A second later, a portal with a blue border opened, and Sal walked in without hesitation. The brief discomfort caused by the teleportation quickly passed, and Sal looked around. The huge hall wasn't completely empty, but everything was huge in size. Volcanic lava and black stones were everywhere, and above that were the metal creations and decorations with the style of the Titans. Because this was the Obsidian Dragon Holy Land in the northwest of the Dragonbone Wilderness, it was also the nest of the Black Dragons. 10,000 years ago, this was the place where the Black Dragons hatched their young. Unfortunately, with the betrayal of the Black Dragons led by Nesario, there were now only 100 or so Draconians who obeyed Onyxia's orders. The square was large and empty, with a large round table in the middle of the square. A man and a woman were chatting in the middle of the square, drinking their lunch. Sal saw a cup of warm black tea on the table, as well as a small plate of biscuits. Duque, dressed in a robe, and the humanoid Black Dragon Princess, dressed in a dark red embroidered dress, were sitting on the chairs beside the table. Duque nodded and smiled at Sal's arrival. "Sal, would you like something to drink?" Only then did Sal notice that there was a large tea set on the table, specially made for the orcs. Sal nodded, not losing the slightest bit of momentum, and sat down peacefully. Sal's long experience of living among humans gave him more indifference. He had not experienced the life of the Lordaeron nobles. But because of his quietness and tame, he was brought into noble balls or tea parties more than once as a slave gladiator champion. Although drinking afternoon tea did not seem to match the rugged appearance of Sal, there was a subtle sense of harmony here. "Oh." Onyxia tilted her head in surprise. Sal took a sip of the black tea, put down the cup, and deftly turned it with his fingertips. He knew very well that the initiative of the conversation was not on his side, so he took the initiative to speak. "Duque, what do you think of the tribe now?" They had known each other for more than 10 years and fought side by side many times. It was not brotherly love, but at least they were very familiar old friends. Sal knew how to deal with humans very well. Duque knew that lies were meaningless to a smart leader like Sal, so he told the truth. Dangerous, arrogant, and conceited. The tribe led by Gurus is like a powder keg, and will explode at the first opportunity. Powder keg. What a vivid metaphor. Sal smiled bitterly. Once a powder keg exploded, he would definitely be dead. The problem was that it would also blow up the people nearby. This was a classic case of harming others and oneself. Duque raised his hand and curled his lips, seemingly a little indifferent. Fortunately, it can't blow through the deck of the Alliance's battleship. Sal now knew the Alliance's attitude better: disgust, vigilance, but not the slightest fear. Once free, they could clean up the current tribe at any time. Sal sighed. Then, Duque, do you hate orcs? Chapter 1868. Duque waved his hand. Personally, I have no prejudice against any race. I admire the words of a great man. He said, I've seen the dirtiest humans and the noblest orcs. I'm not the only one with orc heroes like Grom. The Alliance has also accepted the Draenei. You have to know that they come from the same origin as the Eridar race that we call demons. Duque, you have a forgiving heart. You are indeed a great leader, Sal said with absolute certainty. Duke was a little embarrassed. This was just like the legendary mutual flattery in the business world. Duque spread his hands. I can temporarily suppress the conflict between the Horde and the Alliance in Grey Valley. I can even get the Night Elves to give up a forest area to meet the Horde's logging requirements, but the Horde must talk to the Alliance through formal diplomatic channels. Sal, I know what you want to ask. But I won't give you any promises. The Alliance is the Alliance. This is an organization formed to fight against evil, with militarization as its core. Our purpose has never changed. Whether the Horde becomes the enemy of the Alliance and all of Azeroth depends on the Great Chief of the Horde. Duque emphasized the word, Great Chief. This made Sal feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. Duque drew a line on the table with his finger, and a thin line of frost elements appeared on the table, visually dividing it into two. If the Alliance goes to war with the Horde, it will only happen in one of the following two situations. Either the Horde goes to war with the Alliance first, or the Horde joins the Burning Legion or the Ancient Evil Gods. This line cannot be crossed, or the Alliance will do their best to destroy the Horde first. Duque's words were like words chiseled on a stone wall, cold and sonorous. Sal completely understood Duque's determination. Sal's mouth moved a few times, but he didn't say no. Did he blame Duque? No. He didn't. The old grudge between Duque and the tribe was a matter of the previous generation. Moreover, Duque was also serving his own master. Ever since the world started to collapse and evil forces kept attacking, Duque had been the wisest leader. Not only did he lead the Alliance, he even took care of the tribe for a long time for the sake of righteousness. Duque's words to him were the most perfect promise, an oath that would never be broken. Duque's stance had been the same for more than 10 years, righteousness was the most important. Even as a former enemy and competitor, Sal admired Duque. Not only because of Duque's wisdom in developing new technologies and expanding the new economy, but he also admired Duque's character. The Alliance didn't owe the Horde anything, but the Horde owed the Alliance many favors. Thinking about how the Alliance had spent a lot of effort to rescue more than 2 million tribes from Negrin's shrinking territory, and thinking about how it was the orcs who had been rescued back then who were clamoring to fight the Alliance for fertile land, Sal felt extremely ashamed. From that great migration until now, half of Negrin's land had collapsed. If they had followed the old Horde's methods, at least 2 million orcs would have died of starvation or internal strife. Now, ironically, they didn't die from the collapse of the world. Instead, they were wasted by Gurus in the despicable war of attacking the Twilight Fortress. Gurus clearly had better tactics and strategies, but in order to reduce the pressure on the Horde, he had mercilessly used up human lives. Sal didn't dare to imagine it. If there really came a day when Gurus led the Horde to declare war on the Alliance, Sal lowered his head deeply. After a few seconds, he raised his head. Duque, thank you and the Alliance for your restraint. The recent series of conflicts between the Horde and the Alliance are all because of the Horde. If there really came a day when the Alliance launched a war against the Horde because of the above two reasons, I won't blame you. Sal didn't say if he would still stubbornly stand on the Horde's side in that situation. Sal didn't even make any promises. However, Duque knew what Sal's choice would be. He would most likely set things right like in the original history, and cooperate with the Alliance to overthrow the tyranny of Brainless Roar. After pondering for a while, Duque wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt that it was good to be silent like this. As smart as Sal was, he had realized that the Horde, or rather, the orcs, did not have many choices in the future. He just didn't want to admit this fact. Duque wouldn't push Sal. Because this was the choice of fate, and it was also the choice of him and the orcs he represented. A guy who couldn't see the big picture would only be crushed and destroyed by the giant wheel of fate. Although Duque admired Sal, if that day really came, Duque wouldn't hesitate. Duque stopped thinking about this. Instead, he shamelessly said, "Let me take you to see Alexstrasza." Okay. Duque knew very well that he had taken away Sal's luck. In the original history, this scene in Cataclysm was Sal's highlight. Compared to William, the second-generation leader of the Alliance, Sal was more like the son of the world in the Cataclysm. Sal had used the power of the earth to perfectly fill in the missing part of the dragon's soul. Unfortunately, ever since Duke took care of Onyxia in this life, Sal was destined to be just a bonus, an additional insurance. Between Sal, the orc, and the black dragon princess, Alexstrasza, who had been captured and tortured by the orcs, it was obvious who she trusted more. When facing Duque, except for Nozdormu, the other dragon kings would transform into their human forms to talk to Duque. This was a contribution to Duque, as well as respect for Duque's demigod status. The dragon kings weren't so enthusiastic towards Sal. "Hello, Sal. Thank you for coming to help this time. Regardless of whether you are needed in the end, you and the orcs are willing to contribute to this world, and the Dragon Sleep Temple has received it." Because Duque had greeted her earlier, Alexstrasza's attitude towards Sal was also quite friendly. This made Sal breathe a sigh of relief. The tribe had established connections with the Dragon Sleep Temple and the Guardians too late. By the time Duque had made a name for himself here, the tribe had already been unable to keep up. Whether it was in terms of strength or influence. It wasn't that Sal didn't want to catch up, but this time, Duque's conquest of the three major elemental realms had completely disrupted Sal's rhythm. This was because Sal discovered that if he wanted to become a demigod, it was likely to take about 5 years. For Azeroth, which was facing a crisis of extinction, this was simply impossible. Sal's choice was to be a Messiah shaman, and the price of this choice was likely to be that he would never be able to become a demigod. Sal didn't regret it. He humbly bowed to the Dragon Kings, and then displayed his power as an Earth Shaman. Chapter 1869. A clump of yellow soil appeared on the gorgeous temple floor. The floor was so tight that not even a drop of water could seep in, allowing the soil, which was wrapped in a soft yellow glow, to enter the temple without any hindrance. The soil was layered in front of the Dragon Kings. There were no creatures in the soil, but they could clearly feel that the three elements of water, fire, and wind could penetrate it at will. No vitality was better than overflowing vitality. What a pure power of the earth! Alexstrasza was not stingy with her praise. Duque, who was beside the Black Dragon Princess, pointed at the scene. Every intelligent creature has a different understanding of the earth. Sal's current entry point is the bearing of all things by the earth. Onyxia nodded, not really understanding. Sal, on the other hand, was a little surprised. He did not expect Duque to have dabbled in the power of the earth. That's right, he had experienced the meaning of the earth from the collapsing Nagrand. On the collapsed land of Draenor, there might still be wind, water, and fire in Nagrand, but without the support of the earth, everything would only become debris in the void after falling into the void. Sal witnessed the collapse of this ancestral land day after day, and only then did he realize this from the depths of his soul. He did not expect Duque to see through it so easily. Sal bowed slightly to show his respect to the Dragon Kings. He bowed deeply to Duque. This was not out of respect for Duque's status, but Duque's recognition of his way of the earth. It had a sense of, "I'm not alone." Alexstrasza clapped her hands to attract everyone's attention. "Okay, let's discuss the details of this battle. Please follow me." After saying that, she led everyone to a side hall of the Dragon Slumber Temple. This newly opened side hall was obviously not built according to the size of the dragons. It was 5 meters high, and could only be used by small and medium-sized creatures, such as humans and orcs. On the bright marble floor of the entire side hall, there was only one set of tables and chairs, a circular table with a diameter of 10 meters and more than 10 chairs. The 5 human-shaped dragon aspects took their seats, and Duque, Sal, Queen Sheila, Varian, Muradin, and Lord Howl were also seated. The Red Dragon Queen said, "First, we have to go back 10,000 years ago and obtain the soul of the dragon that has not fallen into the demon's soul. Then, we have to find a way to bring it back to this point in time." Nozdormu said, "I heard the proposal you asked Isra to pass on. I also know that you want us dragons to go back and recharge directly in the past, then return to this point in time to catch Nethario off guard. In fact, we can all go back, but it's not certain when we come back. After the giant dragon soul is charged, it contains too much energy, and I don't have enough power to send it back. Duke suddenly thought of something. Wait, could the soul of the colossal dragon be the combined power of the 5 dragon aspects that surpasses the total power of the 5 dragon aspects? Of the dragon. It's hundreds and thousands of times greater than our individual power. Alexstrasza gave Duque an affirmative answer. Duque was speechless. He had taken everything into account, but he had missed this point. Of course, he knew that if it was charged at this point in time, it would attract Nesario and his main force. He always wanted to replicate the feat of killing Nesario the first time in the past. Unfortunately, things were unpredictable, and it was difficult to get what he wanted. Nozdormu said, the dragon's soul exists for a very short period of time. Not long after it was created, it was tempted by Nesario to inject the most powerful energy into the 4 of us from 10,000 years ago and complete the charge. After it was created, Nesario at that point in time would definitely guard it. He would not let us steal it back successfully. Moreover, if 2 identical dragon kings appeared, too much power would cause changes in time and space, or even cause it to go out of control. I strongly oppose the multiple dragon kings going back together. Duque frowned. Then, can you get the dragon kings to give me a token? I don't expect the 4 of them to believe me at that point in time, at least when I think of a way to sneak attack Nesario and seize the dragon's soul. The 4 dragon kings do not make a move. The 3 veteran dragon kings pondered for a moment. Sure. However, the remaining Calegos could only shrug because the blue dragon king was still Maligos at that time, so there was no other way. At this time, it was Duque's turn to think. How about this, let's change the plan. Only 3 of us will go back, me, Servanas, and Sal. Huh? Are you sure? Isara asked. Nonsense. It turned out that Sal had taken care of his own strength. It was at that moment that Sal truly embarked on the path of the Shaman Messiah. Yes, Duque answered affirmatively. Sending the current Duque and Servanas back won't be too stressful, right? Alexstrasza asked Nozdormu. Nozdormu said seriously, if it were 2 demigods at their peak, it would be very difficult. Duque waved his hand. There's no need. I have mastered the path of demigods. I don't need to rely on a large amount of ready-made magic to exert my combat power. As long as you teleport me to a time node about a month earlier, I can use my own magic net to draw enough magic to fight the dragon aspect. Sal, who was listening, had mixed feelings. A guy like Duque was extremely reliable when he was one of his own. As long as he was given time to complete the preparations in advance, he could definitely make any existence bleed. But when he became an enemy, it would be too terrifying. Nozdormu had no objections to what Duque said just now. Then please be sure to maintain the minimum demigod level before the teleportation and when you are about to return. This will be much easier for me. Because I am still not sure how much the dragon's soul will affect the timeline. Okay. Alexstrasza looked around. Then, Duque, do you need time to prepare? Duque, Queen Sylvanas, and Sal all shook their heads. Duque said instead, it's better to ask if the Sleeping Dragon Temple needs additional preparation work. It is certain that if we make such a big move, Nesario's true body will come to kill us. The core subordinates who serve him will also come out in full force. The Red Dragon Queen pondered for a moment. Then hold on for another week. Okay. After everyone reached an agreement, the meeting was dismissed. A week later, in the Tanaris Desert in the south of the Kalimdor continent, in the Cavern of Time, the humanoid Nozdormu confirmed with the 3 of them for the last time. Are you ready? Yes, the 3 of them answered in unison. Traveling through time and space was a piece of cake for Duque. But for the other 2, it was their first time. And Duque found that it was different from the last time he went back to the past. Nozdormu's hands emitted a dazzling light. This light formed a jet above the heads of the three of them, and the bright light beam blended into the void. Just as the light beam formed a ball of light again, it formed an illusory vortex that sucked all three of them in. Chapter 1870. After the three of them were sucked into the vortex, it began to shrink in the blink of an eye and quickly disappeared. Time seemed to be stuck in a state of stillness. Sylvanas thought she was dead. She felt like she was in a pitch-black world, with no up or down or left or right. The illusory feeling of weightlessness made her panic. It was as if there was no passage of time, and there was no concept of space. The only thing she could feel was that her mind could still function smoothly. She could not breathe, speak, or move. She did not know how long had passed. Perhaps it was a second, or perhaps a century. Even with the longevity and experience of elves, she was a little panicked when faced with a situation where time seemed to have stopped. Am I really dead? Sylvanas could not help but think. At that moment, she felt a warm and familiar touch on her palm, making her aware of Duque's existence. She subconsciously moved closer to him, but it was a pity that she could not even move a finger. Even so, the feeling of her fingers tightly clasped together made her feel very at ease. At that moment, she suddenly heard Nozdormu's voice. Sorry to keep you waiting. The Bronze Dragon King always had a poker face. Even in human form, he rarely showed any expression. He spoke to mortals in a tone that had never changed in 10,000 years. Normally, she would find him boring, but at times like this, he was very reliable. The next moment, other senses returned. Sylvanas's vision was still filled with endless darkness, but fragments of colorful light began to appear in her vision. They were like broken glass, reflecting a blurry light in the darkness. However, the scenes that were being played on these fragments made her feel like she was looking at an incomplete magic mirror. The mirror reflected various scenes. Some of them were scenes that she had experienced in the past, such as the thousands of years she had spent in the Eversong forest. However, some scenes were extremely unfamiliar and shocking to her. This was because she had seen herself die under Arthas's sword in the battle to protect Silvermoon City. Her soul had been captured, her heart had been tortured, and she had become the banshee she once hated the most. Then, she had become the queen of the Forsaken. These scenes appeared and disappeared with the flashing fragments. Until two stable doors of light appeared in front of her, one on the left and one on the right. Queen Sylvie found Nozdormu standing in front of the two light doors. She was holding Duque's hand and hovering in the air on Duque's left. Sal was on Duque's right. The three of them subconsciously stared at the light door, because it seemed like there was another world behind the door, the world of the future. The image of the future was evolving at the speed of 1 day per second. Even so, the three of them immediately noticed a divergence. One of the worlds quickly finished its evolution. It was the Azeroth that was quickly destroyed by Nesario, the Elemental Lords, and the Twilight Disciples. The land was desolate. There was not a single living plant. The ground was littered with the remains of dead humans and orcs. Tens of thousands of years of intelligent life had come to an end. However, the other worlds seemed to have continued. Azeroth seemed to have been destroyed by the combined forces of Nesario and the 4 elemental realms. The Horde was also destroyed. However, a small number of the Alliance's elites began interstellar travel. In the light door, the three of them saw Duque's figure. Duque was commanding the evacuation of the people and soldiers. Some boarded the Dreenii spaceships, while others evacuated directly to an unknown planet through the dark door. After that, the Burning Legion followed like shadows. Duque led everyone to fight and retreat. Although the end result was still destruction, they had at least held on for 100 years. Originally, the three of them wanted to see more, but who knew that Nozdormu would raise his hand? Sylvanas and Sal turned into streams of light and flew backward. Forward was the future. Backward was the past. Nozdormu only left Duque behind. Do you know why I left you alone? Duke Marcus. Nozdormu seemed very calm, be it his voice or his appearance. Duque felt that this bronze dragon king seemed a little excited. As the guardian of time, I have faithfully discharged my duties for 25,000 years. Next, I will tell you a secret. I would not have said it until the end of the world. Duque suddenly felt a little nervous. For the first time, Nozdormu's poker face, which had never changed for 10,000 years, showed an excited expression. As the guardian of time, whether it is the future or the past, everything is within my observation. In the first few years when I started to fulfill this duty, I was extremely excited. Because I could freely observe any part of the past or the future. The unknown past and future satisfied all my curiosity and desire to explore. Unfortunately, after a few hundred years, I got tired of it. I am the guardian of time, and any action that causes a large change in history has to be corrected by me. It is not that I have not tried asking for help from mortals to go back in time to correct history. Often, the price I have to pay is just the most insignificant equipment in my collection, such as excellent or epic grade equipment. As long as it does not affect the course of history, I do not care about any changes in the past or future. This is because the River of Time has a powerful corrective ability, and it is enough to correct most variables. However, a huge variable called Duke Marcus appeared. When I first found out that you changed history, I saw you as a tumor of time that must be removed. At this point, Nozdormu glared at Duque fiercely. Even an experienced person like Duque felt his heart palpitate. Immediately after, Nozdormu's gaze softened. Indeed, I was prepared to observe you for a while before deciding whether or not to eliminate you as a variable. Unfortunately, I found out that I was wrong. The river of time that I followed did not resist the changes that you brought. It seemed to accept everything that you did and was happy to see it happen. I could not accept this change. So before I took action, I decided to observe you personally. Then, I discovered something that shocked me. I knew from your reaction that you actually knew my future. When Nozdormu said this, Duque also felt a faint pain in his balls. As a transmigrator, of course, he knew that the fallen Nozdormu from the future was trying to disrupt the current point of time. Then, in the long river of time, the current Nozdormu and the fallen Nozdormu from the future started a war, and in the end, both of them perished. Chapter 1871. What was even worse was that this incident was about to happen. Nozdormu was absolutely miserable. After he and the Bronze Dragon Legion knew their fates, one by one, they became corrupted and fell. The one who killed them was not someone else, but himself from the future. No matter how hard he tried to change history, he would not be able to reverse the destruction of the future. This was the most despairing thing. Seeing Duque's reaction, Nozdormu had a look of realization. As expected, you know my future. Duke Marcus, can you tell me your true identity? In my eyes, you are an anomaly, a variable that should never exist. I wanted to drive you out of the Azeroth timeline, but I finally realized that it was the world of Azeroth that brought you in order to change the future. This time, it was Duque's turn to be speechless. He had never thought that there would be so many secrets to his transmigration. Nozdormu sighed. To be honest, it was because of that end. I was angry. I fought. I complained. I was in despair. But ever since you appeared and gradually stood at the peak of the world stage, using your wisdom and strength to influence the future of this world, I have new hope. Nozdormu floated closer to Duque. For the first time, he showed an expression that should have been a smile. Hope. Duque resisted the displeasure of having his mind peeped. Don't you want to die? Die? No, no, no. I don't have that concept anymore. What I'm tired of is the unchanging time itself. It's too boring. Duke Marcus, you are already a demigod. When you experience everything in the world, when everything from the unknown to the known, perhaps you will become as bored and empty as I am. 25,000 years of repetitive behavior is too boring. If not for my duty, I might have gone crazy. In the future, I might have fallen that way. So, I'm just eager to see variables. Variables? Yes. As long as I protect this world, I don't mind seeing variables. Because it will bring me joy. Looking at the excited Nozdormu, Duque had a playful expression on his face. Oh. Could it be that as long as it is beneficial to this world and does not affect your duty to protect the world and time, you are willing to make a certain degree of concession? Given. Nozdormu sneered, who knows how many times. If I hadn't persistently refused any future, me who had yet to fall, to enter this timeline, you would have been dead before you became a demigod. Duque immediately broke out in a cold sweat, his heart beating wildly. That's right. In the past, he was too weak, so weak that he had no way to resist the power of a demigod. If a future Nozdormu appeared before he became a demigod and wanted to fix him, he would not be able to resist. One had to know that Nozdormu's main body was extremely powerful. Even a demigod like Nesario would be slowed down by 20% under the erosion of his time magic. If Duque had encountered him before he became a demigod, he would probably have been directly sent into the abyss of time. Duque bowed deeply to Nozdormu. Thank you very much. I owe you a favor. If there's a chance, I will return it. No. You've already returned it. Nozdormu seemed to be in a good mood. Let me give you a hint, Onyxia. Ah. Duque was stunned, and suddenly understood. Just as he was about to say something, Nozdormu laughed and pushed him in the chest. Countless fragments of time turned into streams of light and flashed forward in Duque's field of vision. Meanwhile, Duque himself was violently pulled back by a mysterious force. In the middle of his field of vision, he only saw Nozdormu with a mysterious smile. He raised his right index finger and made a shoo gesture at him. That's what it means to say to Duke, to keep it a secret. It would take a long period of time in the river of time to go back 10,000 years in the past. Duque felt that his entire soul had been stretched into a long noodle shape. Taking advantage of this moment, Duque was thinking about why Nozdormu had said that. He suddenly understood. In the ancient war 10,000 years ago, Nesario had deceived his brothers and sisters and made the 4 dragon kings inject most of their origin power into the soul of the giant dragon. That was how the dragon nuclear bomb was created, which directly turned dozens of demon legions into ashes. The strength of the 4 dragon kings, who had been injected with most of their origin power, had also fallen greatly. It was not until Duque destroyed the soul of the demon in this life that the Dragon King's power was restored to its original state. Even so, there were still dragon aspects during this period of 10,000 years. In the original history, in order to kill Nesario, who was in a state of madness and had entered the source of Azeroth, the 4 dragon kings had no choice but to use all their power in the soul of the giant dragon. After all, although Thrall had filled the vacant position and successfully activated the soul of the giant dragon, the power of the dragon aspects could only be extracted from the 4 dragon kings. This directly caused the 4 dragon kings to forever lose the power bestowed upon them by the Titans, and they were demoted from dragon aspects to mortals. Thus, there was a new deduction. What if it was not the 4 dragon kings who injected the power of the dragon aspects into the next battle, but the standard 5 dragon aspects? The power injected would obviously be less than that of the 5 dragon kings in the original history. This obviously gave birth to a new possibility. Perhaps after this battle, the 5 dragon aspects would not completely lose the sacred titan power. Duque slapped his forehead. This butterfly of mine has done something big again. The so-called butterfly effect is really F*King difficult to deal with. Changing the future certainly represented new hope. In turn, it meant that the history that Duque was familiar with was useless. This was both a joy and a pain in the ass. However, Duque soon laughed. In the past, I couldn't completely change the world, and I wasn't afraid of its backlash. But now I'm different. I've made all the preparations, and the backup plans that should be laid have already been activated. Everything is waiting for the harvest. La la la. In the spring, I plant a wife in the soil, and in the autumn, I can harvest many, many wives, Duque sang a tuneless crooked song as he traveled through time and space and returned to 10,000 years ago. When Duque came back to his senses, he found that his face was crooked. Ah! Ouch, ouch, ouch. If it were someone else, Duque would have directly sent the 5 Fireballs divine sect to teach him a lesson. However, the person who twisted his face was Queen Sylvanas, so there was nothing he could do. Ah! Queen Sylvanas? Humph. Tell me, what's going on with that forgotten queen? Sylvanas suddenly showed her might. Ah! Chapter 1872. The Forgotten Queen, the Undead Queen, was the chief of the entire tribe at the most glorious time in history. She had always been brave and determined, but who knew that her withered heart also had a soft and fragile side, and that her dried-up tear ducts could also shed sad tears? Who could understand her loneliness? In order to reunite her sisters, she had once tempted Sasha to become the same existence as her. Unfortunately, Sasha had come to her senses at the last moment. When Legion descends, her eldest sister, Aurelia, returned, and the allied tribes joined forces to fight against the Burning Legion. How did she deal with herself? Perhaps it was the sorrow buried in the deepest part of her heart that made the legend of Queen Sylvanas even more touching. Duque's hesitant expression made Sylvanas feel as if she had been pricked by a needle. Her body trembled. You really know something? Nozdormu refused to say. What about you? There had never been a hero who was really stupid. You could lie for a while, but not forever. Speaking of which, Duque did not really intend to lie to Sylvanas. When he came back to his senses, he found that Sal was not by his side. Duque shrugged. What do you want me to tell you? That Sylvanas and the other parallel to the main world died in the battle to defend Silvermoon? And then continued to exist as the Forgotten Queen? Queen Sylvanas did not really want to be angry at Duque. It was just that she had seen a few fragments at once, and her thoughts were very confused. She was stunned for a moment. Duque took the initiative and hugged Queen Sylvanas. Without a word, he gave her artificial respiration. Queen Sylvanas did not want to interrupt Duque, but they had been married for so many years, and her body and mind had long been in love. No matter how tough she was usually, once a wonderful switch was touched, her whole body and mind would automatically soften. Love sometimes was like that. After a long time, their lips parted. Duque looked at Queen Sylvanas affectionately. Silly woman, you think too much. Yes, I did peek into part of the past and the future, but that was something that happened in another branch of the timeline. What's important is that you're alive and well in this main timeline, and you're the mother of our child, right? At the mention of the child, the last trace of stiffness on Savannah's face softened. She subconsciously touched her lower abdomen. Queen Sylvie rolled her eyes at Duque. Besides, you were already in love with my sister and third sister at that time. No matter what, you can't leave me alone and let me die. Right? Speaking of this, Queen Sylvie turned her head away from Duque. Who knows if you knew that I was almost killed and took the opportunity to save the damsel in distress to deceive me. Duque was about to spit. He bared his teeth. Sigh. Women. Why did he like to mess things up? Speaking of which, I don't remember what I was thinking at that time. He just felt that everything was going with the flow, and he didn't let go of the wrong person. However, seeing Queen Sylvie's slightly red cheeks and slightly trembling pointy long ears. After so many years, how could Duque not know her little habit? She was clearly saying, come and coax me. If you coax me, I won't throw a tantrum. Duque could only coax her, holding her slender fingers with both hands. Perhaps for me at that time, peeping into the future was beneficial for my actions at that time. But one thing is for sure, I was sincere to you and your sister. I couldn't let you get hurt, let alone walk into a desperate situation of death. Duque was about to take out the Bible of picking up girls and recite the 10 quotations when Queen Sylvie put her index finger on his lips. Queen Sylvie's golden eyebrows slightly raised, giving Duque a feeling of pride, but her perfect and heroic face was full of concern. Idiot Duque. Do you really think I'm angry that you didn't tell me that I might die and become an ugly banshee? Ah. Duque didn't know how to react or what expression to show. Queen Sylvie's slender fingers held Duque's face, and her clear eyes looked straight into Duque's eyes. Don't think that we women don't know the gloominess under your cheerful expression. We all know that you are hiding a bigger, more shocking secret in your heart. No one knew why you were unwilling to tell us at that time, but we can be sure that even if you lied to us, it was for our own good. In the past, I didn't understand why you would pay special attention to a certain woman in the harem at a certain time. Now that I see the divergence in the river of time, I completely understand. Even if you conquered Onyxia by violent means, it should be because she should have died at a certain point in time. Sorry. Maybe I was very willful, very self-centered, and very weak in the past. Powerless against powerful evil. But now it's different. I already understand the burden on your shoulders, and I know your hard work. Duque, promise me, no matter how great the suffering is, don't bear it alone, okay? Be it me or the other sisters, we are all starting to have the ability to share your burdens. Duque was completely stunned. Caring too much would make one afraid of losing. Sometimes, he was so worried about gains and losses that he forgot the iron rule of, your daddy will always be your daddy. Queen Sylvie didn't die, and she wouldn't die even after becoming a demigod. Plus, she saw the old ending that Nozdormu showed her. Perhaps, she could really give her some more burdens. Duke sighed, alright, I've been defeated by you. Then, help me think of a way to steal the giant dragon's soul, without changing history. You have to know that we have returned to 10,000 years ago, and changing history will affect 10,000 years later. For example, if you come back and deal with Tyrant? Queen Sylvie's beautiful eyes turned. Ha! Where's the trust? He. Duque could only pretend to laugh dryly. Alright, I'm not here to keep an eye on you. I don't have the mood to restrict a man like you to death. Queen Sylvie's eyes revealed a strange light, and she took the initiative to change the topic. Actually, I think we just need to give the dragons a hint. Hint? For example, if the dragon's soul is not easy to get, we can make a prototype first. That way, if we steal a finished product, they can quickly modify it and turn it into a perfect dragon's soul. After all, dragon's soul can only be used if it is infused with at least a large portion of the 4 dragon aspects power. Without the power, it's just an empty shell. Oh. That's a good idea. Duque changed the topic. Actually, we don't need to hint. We can just look for Nozdormu. Chapter 1873. Queen Sylvanas proposed a new idea. Then I have another question. If Nozdormu knew the future and knew that Nesario had betrayed the dragons, would he still watch the 4 major dragons be deceived? Would he let Nesario betray the law of protection, and he himself would adhere to the death principle of not revealing the future that the Titans gave him? Wouldn't Nozdormu make any decision at any time, but in fact, it would be a decision made in the known future? This sounded a little roundabout and nerve-wracking. In fact, the logic was still valid because Nozdormu's duty was to protect the timeline from deviation. If even he led the timeline astray, then there would be no protection to speak of. However, in reality, only when one became the guardian of time could one know whether this was the truth or not. Duque sighed. Perhaps, this is the sorrow brought about by his duty. Even though he knew that a tragedy was bound to happen, he still had to participate in that terrible tragedy. As a catalyst, he had to play out this tragedy and push his brothers and sisters into the abyss of pain. Phew. Fortunately, I don't have to be the guardian of time. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll go crazy. Windrunner, who loved freedom and refused to be bound, had to do this unchanging job. Queen Sylvanas would probably want to kill herself. Well, our power now is too weak. I can smell the stench of demons in the atmosphere. I guess the Burning Legion has arrived. While the main force of the Legion has not arrived, let's first control the elements in the atmosphere. Okay. Duque was a genuine water and fire dual elemental demigod, and Queen Sylvanas was a wind demigod. After their levels increased, their elemental affinity was also countless times higher. At this point in time, Ragnaros and Al-Akir were still alive, so naturally, they could not extract the elements of the three major elemental realms. On the other hand, because these two elemental lords were in a state of hibernation, no one would compete with them for the three elements of water, fire, and wind in the main plane of Azeroth. This made them feel like weasels entering a hen's nest. The so-called supermarket that they did not have to pay for was so cool. The place where they transmigrated was located in the southeast corner of the ancient Kalimdor continent that had not been blown up, probably near the future Zulk, Europe. Duque and Queen Sylvani's elemental absorption naturally aroused a response from the troll priests of the Gurubashi Empire. Indeed, there were priests who were not afraid of death and led the trolls to investigate, but Duque used a bunch of hands of magic on them, combining the simplest and most violent demigod level, fireball, into a sickening, meteor shower, teaching the crazy trolls that humans are dangerous. The Burning Legion was currently invading, and the entire central region of the continent was in chaos with Azhara City at the center. No one would care about the remote mountain forests of the continent. The huge troll empire was beaten like a dog. When Duque had absorbed enough elements, he realized that he had gone overboard. I seem to have accidentally killed tens of thousands of the troll empire's elites. Duque was speechless. Well done. Queen Sylvia gave a thumbs up. She was simply fanning the flames. Duque slapped his forehead. Back in his time, the Amani trolls had been exterminating for years. It had been so long that he had actually forgotten that the High Elves and the trolls were mortal enemies. By the way, don't you still have 2,000 years before you run into the Amani trolls who have nothing to do with the Gurubashi Empire? Damn the trolls. Queen Sylvani said stubbornly. If I have time, I don't mind going to the Amani trolls again. Duque slapped his forehead. Fine, you have the biggest breasts. You have the final say. After absorbing the elements, they were genuine demigod level again. I found Thrall. Queen Sylvani was a little excited. The wind element told me that he's in the Cavern of Time in Tanaris. Huh. Thrall really has ideas. Duque could not remember how Thrall got the dragon soul in the original history. Clearly, after being teleported to this point in time, Thrall had his own ideas. At the same time, outside the Cavern of Time, Thrall was struggling. He was stopped. He had spoken until his lips were sore, but the Bronze Dragon Legion did not let him in. They did not even want to listen to him and kept driving him out. Thrall felt extremely bitter. This was the disadvantage of not having a good relationship with the Dragon Slumber Temple. This was because Nozdormu had indeed given them a token, but that thing was in Duque's hands. If he returned to 10,000 years ago and did not perform well, then he would still be that insignificant orc in the eyes of the dragons. Just as he was about to reveal some spoilers of what would happen 10,000 years later to attract the attention of the Bronze Draconians, a familiar aura suddenly came from the portal behind him. Duque, Sylvanas, you're here. Not knowing whether it was melancholy or relief, Sal heaved a sigh of relief. Well, since everyone is thinking the same thing, I'll leave it to you. I'll help you. Thrall was carefree. He wanted to show off, but that did not mean that he wanted to anger Duque. In the situation where he could not contact Duque, he was free to do whatever he wanted. But since Duque was here, he would be overstepping his boundaries if he acted recklessly. Duque glanced at Thrall and suddenly said, you know what? What we did 10,000 years ago is very likely to affect 10,000 years later. Thrall was shocked and asked, then, what if we go too far? The Bronze Dragon clan will send out pursuers who will use special methods to kill us in the River of Time. Of course, for the original plan, they should send a second group to try to get that thing back. Thrall was silent. Duque knew that he was in a heavy mood, but he still needed to give him a warning, remember. History may be changed and fine-tuned. What is truly irresistible is the general trend. General trend? What was the general trend? This word could make Thrall think for a long, long time. Only Duque himself knew that this was Azeroth's determination to unite the various races against the Burning Legion. Only by defeating the demon army led by Sargeras could the planet have a way out and all races continue. No matter who it was, if they resisted the general trend, they would only be crushed by the wheels of history. Duque would not tell Thrall. Facing the guardian of the Cavern of Time, Duque gently raised a special badge. Feeling the power of the badge, the bronze draconic man immediately became respectful, and immediately ran to report. A moment later, Duque and the other two were brought to a desolate cave. There was nothing but sand. Suddenly, a huge sand dragon formed in front of the three of them. Speak. Did the future me ask you to cause trouble at the time node I'm guarding?